Welcome to the podcast that's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist. The Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee with our head coach, Chad Timmerman.
All right, buddy.
Our CEO, Nate Pearson.
Hello.
We're back in the TrainerRoad studios this week. It's been a little bit. We were off in Kona. We hope you enjoyed those podcasts. But it's good to be back and good to have the whole crew together again because you missed the last one that we did in Kona.
It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been. Yeah. So first things first, we're going to just recap a bit of the performances from the athletes from Kona to kind of bring everything full circle. Last time you heard from these people, they were just getting ready to race, some nervous, some excited, everything else. So the first podcast that we did, which was episode 224 with Frida Hedman, she was the one where her bike never showed up, still never showed up. So she rode on a borrowed bike. Pretty crazy story there. Mm-hmm. She ended up swimming a 107.02. She rode a 5:47.51, which that's impressive for being on a totally borrowed bike with a weird bike fit, everything else. Mm-hmm. And then she ran a 3:53.42. She said the last 20 kilometers, which is a good chunk of that run, she said the last 20 kilometers were just so hard. So much harder than she had anticipated. But she got a 10:55, which she got 28th in her age group, which at Kona, that's extremely impressive. Mm-hmm. Like reminding folks, this isn't just a normal Ironman. Scott Byram, he was episode 225. He did a 109 swim. For his bike, he did a 4:59, fast time. And he did...
Do you think he really wanted to get under 5? Right? When you see that, you're
just
like...
Go on, go, right? Then he did a 3:47 run for a combined time of 10:08. So he was 109th in his age group. And he mentioned that on the bike, he said the wind was so tough, like really, really tough. And he said it just basically dropped his speed down so much more than he thought it was going to in a lot of sections. Then the speediest time of all from Norman Bannock. He was the guy from Germany living in Austria that we interviewed, episode 226. 59:43 swim, so sub-hour swim. That's fast. They had a really strong current that day they were pulling them in and out, but it was pulling them off course pretty hard. So 59:43. His bike was 4:49.17, and then his run was 3:15.09. So he had a combined time of 9:11.09, which is that is so fast. And he got 16th in his age group. 94th male, 105th athlete overall. So he is, when you look at that, the 105th best triathlete in the world. That's
including pros?
Yep, including pros.
Wow.
That's really impressive. And he did that on the TrainerRoad training plans. As all these athletes that we're talking to here, almost all of them followed the plans basically to a T, then added on as they wished, right? Which is really cool. That's a good thing to see. So way to go, Norman. Super fast time. John Borton from the UK, episode 227. He swam a 106.38. His bike was 5:16.06. I was out on the bike course at multiple spots, just bouncing around all over the course on Saturday and got to see him out there. And he looked surprisingly chipper because I saw a lot of people coming through that did not look so chipper. But he looked like he was hanging in there. And then on his run, he did a 3:08.41, which was 13th in his age group and the 85th fastest run on the day, including pros.
That's awesome.
That's really fast. And I ran with him for just a short period on the run course. And he was just about to turn down on Walalai and come down to Elite Drive and into the finish. And he was in a bad place. I'm impressed, though. He did a 9:42, so that's super impressive. Then we get into Nate Zarlango. He was the one that got hit by the car just before. And I talked to him. He said that he was even more sore on race day. So 1:14.05 swim. His bike was 5:17.26, and he said that on the bike it was his shoulder started to go, then his hips started to go, then just everything. He was just so sore from that crash.
He's got to run a marathon.
Yeah, and then 3:49 run. He described the run as very lonely. Just out on the Queen K too. When you get out there during the run course and you go out there, it is just it's a long straight section, but also at that point there's no fanfare because the pros have already finished, right? So a lot of people are just down in that area. There's no one up there. It's rough.
The crazy thing in a normal Ironman, a 3:49 would be one of the faster bikes or runs.
Yeah.
And you'd be lonely just because you're in the front of the race. Especially with a 5:17 bike. There's not many people do that. But at Kona,
amazing.
It's everyone is right there because they all qualified, right?
Yeah.
It's just crazy at a World Champs. The level of these athletes is amazing.
truly is a world
It
championship.
can skew your expectations too, because I look at these times and I'm like, okay, yeah, but these are
the best. These are the
Yes.
best, right?
And he did a 10:33. Now, keep in mind that the majority of these people that we were talking to, they all had sub 9 times or somewhere around there going into Kona. So it shows that like Kona, like tack on an hour, tack on 2 hours, and that's like what it's going to be.
Well, you know, I do the same thing when I was a triathlete. You look at the times, you're like, I could maybe do all of those by themselves. But do like do Geiger on TrainerRoad and then just run a 5K and see how your 5K time goes.
I did enough duathlon
Seriously.
to appreciate how hard it is to run off the bike.
Yeah.
Those
But,
are
I mean,
short. Those are short. But I mean,
Exactly.
40K bike.
A 5-hour bike.
Oh,
if we're
yeah.
lucky.
Yeah.
Oh, our triathlon challenge has changed. Can we stay on top of triathlon
Yeah,
for a second?
let's do that.
It's
Yeah,
updated.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So, I have a confession to make. I broke our thing.
Oh no.
Are packed.
Yep. When I was at the Honolulu airport going to Chicago, I ran like half a mile as fast as I could.
To get to the next gate.
Yeah. And I was like,
Started
I could
training.
do this. I had luggage with me and stuff. I'm like, I am literally an Ironman right now training. Because I had just seen everybody.
We just saw it. Yeah, yeah.
The
I
world
feel that.
record was
Yeah.
about to be broken
Yeah.
twice, and one unofficially and once for the women in Chicago. And then we saw another world record in Kona.
Yeah, Kipchoge's 159.
Yeah.
Amazing.
That one's not official.
Yeah, oh, true. Yeah,
the
yeah,
Chicago
yeah,
Marathon
yeah.
one's more impressive, and
contrived
Jan's
as
is
it gets.
impressive too.
Jan Frodeno,
Yeah.
blew it away.
Anyways, what we talked about it, and since I already broke it, that we will. So in 2 years, or no, when we're 40, what year is this? 2022.
It's 2022.
2022. We plan on doing triathlon. We're gonna do a sprint, Olympic, half, and a full within 6 months. Before we weren't gonna start training until then. That's off.
Well, you say we.
You can start training. Yeah. Okay. Well,
I'm still gonna run. I'm not gonna wait until that to
you
run.
can train all you want. You just don't do a triathlon. Let's do the first sprint together 6 months out.
Yeah,
Cool.
totally.
But that lets Jonathan live on the swim.
Not die in the swim.
And my knees hurt from, I actually cramped. I ran half a mile, and in the airplane, I stood up and my calf cramped, and I couldn't move. And I was just thinking of all the
that's so
Ironman
good.
athletes.
I know,
like,
right?
It probably wasn't even half a mile. It probably was like quarter mile.
Yeah.
It took a long time, though.
Yeah, yeah.
No, but
It-
I was already running, and then I've been doing maintenance runs, just like a Sunday run with Amaret. So
Everyone
and
wants
I'm
to
not
know,
gonna
how fast are
stop
you?
doing that. Oh, I'm not fast. These are like 8-9 minute miles,
It's fast?
and
For how
you're,
long?
and you're just in it's
20, 22 miles?
3 to 6 miles.
So,
Yeah, no, we're just doing short runs. She's
That's still
she,
good.
She was
That's
training
good.
for a triathlon. I was
Yeah.
accompanying her. It wasn't training, but it was mileage.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's
I mean,
something.
it's still training. It wasn't training for anything specific.
And the good thing that it does is it builds up a lot of durability.
And
So to
that's the
speak.
idea. I mean, I got some old bones here relative to you youngsters.
No, my knees. We talked about this already on the channel, and then when I was in Chicago, I ran on the treadmill like twice for 3 miles, which was so hard, and my knees hurt like still today, like
Really?
a week
Cycling
later.
doesn't do our knees any favors.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it's low impact, but it doesn't
Yeah.
do a whole lot of restructuring.
I know. I've always had
True.
knee problems too, and I'm a big lanky guys usually have
Yeah.
problems with knees. So
Right. Can we talk about the two events that, because, and for people that don't know, when we trained for this in 2022, which I'm really glad we're talking about this now, because we're not going to have enough opportunities to talk about it up until then.
Yeah, we've only got 2 years.
Only 2 years.
3.
But we're not going to be training for a sprint, then train for an Olympic, then train for a half, then train for a full. We're just going to train for the full.
Yep.
And those races will happen.
Yep. Those are more execution practice. What does it feel like to run off the bike? How am I transition? Nutrition on the bike, equipment,
Yeah.
what hurts, all that
All
sort of
that stuff.
Everything hurts. Just so you know.
Do we want to talk about the two events that we're targeting for the
No,
full?
because we don't know yet, and I don't want anyone to plan anything yet around that.
Yeah, yeah.
Until we really decide.
Cool.
And I think, until we really decide and say we're going to try to sign up for those, we should do it.
If anybody wants to give us suggestions, you can go into forum.trainerroad.com and you can go and find this episode. It's episode 230, and you can let us know which ones we should do and why. We can probably tell them what we're looking for.
Yeah, let's tell them that.
We're looking for we're looking for the
This is
swim
for the
is,
Ironman.
Yeah, for the Ironman. The swim is the swim, really. I mean, obviously nothing too crazy, but the swim's the swim.
What's illegal would be great for us.
Yes. On the bike, we would like something that's a relatively difficult bike course with elevation change.
But not crazy climbing. Because
Right.
Chad and I are big dudes.
Rolling course would be cool.
Yep,
Yep,
rolling,
rolling,
but
yeah.
not like a pure watt per kg.
Yeah, like nothing with really big long climbs or
Yep.
anything else like that.
Like Kona would be a great bike course, I think, for us.
Sure. Yeah, if it wasn't in Kona with all that wind and heat.
Yeah.
And fast people. Then on the just like it. And then on the run,
as easy and flat as possible.
Yeah, and
no elevation.
If it has a run where it's actually like laps within like a smaller thing, even better.
Yeah,
that gives you a chance to pull out because you're like,
I hadn't thought about that.
If it's like point to point, you're like,
laps
I got to go back.
Temptations.
No, seriously.
No, I believe it.
It is. When I've only done one Ironman and it was horrible, and both times I was like looking at everyone finished already.
That would be hard. Okay, so maybe not, but just the same, an easy run.
And sea level, I think it just makes it easier for us.
Yeah.
I don't want to do any like 7,000 feet or even 4,000 feet, and then not extreme weather temperatures. We're pretty.
And no hard man races.
Yeah.
Just make this as easy
not
as
100
possible,
degrees,
people.
not like 30 degrees.
I can just see people in the forum right now just talking about how weak we're being.
There's a certain number of people who are like, you should do the most epic one possible.
Yeah.
Straight out of the gates, no.
Yeah.
Just no.
How about never? It's hard enough.
Yeah.
Never.
I completely agree.
Maybe for a half, we can have adverse conditions.
No, the halves are
I'm
hard.
just saying, if we're gonna have it, let's not have it for the full distance.
Yeah.
I don't doubt that.
Yeah, let's just not have it. Let's just have make everything nice and good.
A half can
that's
feel
how
like
we'll go.
Leadville.
Oh yeah,
It's just like
it's a big day.
It's tough. It's a big day.
One quick thing. So I went to my wife and I took a short vacation over in Maui after Kona for a little bit, and I had my first altercation, or I guess I had my first crash with the car. So it's hard to say I got hit by the car because I hit the car.
You did the hitting.
But it wasn't my fault. It was the classic thing that so many people listening to this have had, where the car passes you and then immediately turns right, and they turn right in front of you, and you have nowhere to go. And in this case, I had just a couple of things I wanted to share, just because I know that all of us listen to this. We ride out on the road, that sort of stuff. And one thing really, really, really helped me, and that was that Garmin Varia radar that I have. So this is like where I was riding in Maui and in Wailea. It's like a lot of spots, or in Kihei actually, where people can turn in. And anytime I get close to those intersections, I'm paying attention to the radar to see if there's a car coming up or where they're at, because they might make a turn. And when you don't have that radar, you don't know where they are. So this thing is really helpful. So I was coming up to an intersection, saw a car was coming up, so I eased off because I was probably going like 23, 22 miles an hour because I was carrying a pretty good pace. But I eased up when I saw that happening in the intersection coming, and sure enough, they just passed and turned right in front of me. I was able to skid sideways and bleed a ton of speed. And then I just basically put my foot into the side of their rental car door, dented it really bad. But the bike didn't make impact, just my body did. And it was a very light impact with my body, strong with the heel and then light with everything else. So I came out entirely fine. But if you do have those, it's super important that we all stay heads up. It's just things happen way out of your control.
My dad is listening, I'm sure. And what he always said was like driving, like expect everyone to just do something crazy.
100%.
And when you look on the road, lots of people don't drive that way. Where if someone in front of you, expect them to just randomly slam on the brakes. Yes. And it happens all the time. You see it now, you have YouTube, you can see it all the time. And cycling is even more important because you're not surrounded by this metal box. If somebody pulls in front of you, just expect them to make, if there's a possible right turn, expect them to make it. If there is a shoulder for them to pull over, expect them to do it. If you're descending behind a car, expect them to see a deer and slam on the brakes.
And always be aware of your exits. Have a couple exit strategies, ideally.
Yeah, you got to have enough room though to stop. So if you're going too fast, and this happens to Ironman athletes too. It happened to Jordan Rapp. That if you're in the aero bars and someone does that, it's a lot worse.
Can't do anything in that position.
You take out a second or two of stopping, and with your speed, that's a lot of distance.
Yes, a ton of distance. Yeah. So, but that radar was huge, and ever since I rode with yours once, now I can't really imagine riding without it. They're awesome.
You had this too, but I think all cyclists should have it. Is the front blinking light? And I know it doesn't look super cool, but the fact that somebody might turn right in front of you. Hopefully that blink, people will be able to see it. Yeah. And it just has to work once in your whole career.
Yep.
And it's worth it.
I had for those that are wondering, I had the Bontrager Ion 200 RT Flare RT light set. That's just what it's written. But that's the one I had. And it actually attaches to the GoPro mount beneath my Garmin mount on the front. Super easy setup. And it's a tiny light, but it's really bright and it pulses at kind of like a weird rhythm, so it's good to get attention. You have the Pro ion flare, the bigger one.
See, I think I might get depending on the light, the Pro is bigger, but it's used for night riding too, as like a bigger battery.
Yeah.
But with the Flash that I do, it's like something crazy, like 12 or 18 hour battery life, which I don't need on the road.
Right.
So maybe the small one would be nice if it's the same brightness, because I would totally do a bigger one.
I'm not sure it's as bright as yours. Yours is really bright.
Yeah, right? You guys rode with me.
Yep,
Could you
it's
see
really
me?
bright.
When you look around,
yeah.
would you see me blinking in the daylight?
No,
always.
I'd see your light. When you were riding behind me, I would see your light blinking just from the reflection of the jersey in front of me.
Yeah, that was in the mornings too, but maybe not in the day.
Even in the day.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really
And it has
bright.
like Bontrager has like a different pattern. So it's a weird pattern. It's supposed to get humans to look at it.
Sure.
Yeah, works well.
It's not rhythmic.
Yeah, it's not rhythmic.
So
Fantastic.
always be as safe as you can when you're out there. Nate, did you have anything else that you want to add on that?
No.
Move on?
Or ride indoors.
Yeah, true story. Yeah, better training too.
We talk about this a lot. I think everyone can do what they want, but I want to do more indoor ridings and then mountain biking. Mountain biking, you do get hurt, you crash more often, but they're like collarbones and wrists rather than cars.
And there's a lot of crashes that kind of have to happen, I feel like, to get to the point. Like you crash a lot and you're totally fine on a mountain bike, right?
Yeah.
There's like tip overs and stuff like that. But
and some of the downhill people can get seriously injured and you can die.
Sure.
But you can manage your speed. It's in your control.
And almost always, that's it. Almost always those crashes are on you.
Yes.
So it's not someone else's influence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. You can't be riding completely safe and a car just comes through the woods and smacks you.
Yeah, it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Cars don't fit well on single track. So one correction from a previous episode that I want to cover. So we talked about standing versus sitting last time, and we saw a few different people write in and perhaps misconstrued or took our words a bit further than they needed to be. We got the question basically, should I always sit during workouts? Because we were talking about the fact that standing is less efficient than sitting. And that's just the facts. That's just what it is, right?
It is. That's not to say stay seated all the time. It's just recognize that you will sacrifice some efficiency when you get out of the saddle.
Yeah, and I think you have to kind of prepare for the demands of your races, right? If you don't plan to stand at all, I still would recommend getting used to standing, just because at some time you're going to need to be able to do it.
Comfortably move in and out of the saddle, gracefully, minimally wasteful.
Yep. But if you have a race where you know that you're going to be out of the saddle a lot, like I think of like cyclocross racing, I think of short track mountain bike racing, that sort of stuff.
Anything that requires high power or explosive power, you're going to get out of the saddle from time to time.
Yep, get used to it. So it's a good thing to do. A couple other things really quick. Nate, can we actually go into your new bike, and then we're going to jump back up to item 3 that we have on the list there?
Let's do it.
Okay, so you got a new mountain bike. Cross-country mountain bike.
I did.
Because you had a Specialized Epic.
I did.
And then you got a Yeti SB150.
I did.
And that like leveled you up, because the SB150 is a big enduro bike, and it really helped you kind of get more comfort and speed. I spent time at North Star, wore body armor, had a very forgiving bike that slowed down the trail, had nice beefy tires. The fear went away. And when the fear went away, I could actually work on technique. And then as the technique comes back and I come back on a cross-country bike, there's no fear, because it just feels slower and more stable than it did before. This is like a really interesting point, because there's two schools of thought on this, right? There are some people that just say, get the bike, get a hardtail that's like an upright head tubing on, that'll teach you how to ride, right? That's
hard.
It's like an old school thought.
School of hard knocks.
Yeah. Just throw them in the pool.
Yeah, exactly. They'll figure it out. But the downside to that, like you said, Nate, is that it's just you never reach a level of comfort that allows you to fully learn. Yep. We've talked about that plenty of times. Like the level of arousal is higher than that sweet spot of 7 to 8, somewhere around there. It's up into the 9s and 10s, and you're just never able to actually figure it out. Yeah. And if it's so sketchy underneath you at all times, you don't know what's causing you to go out of control. You know,
pretty hard to learn.
It is. Yeah. When you're crashing all the time.
Yeah. Or just carrying a ton of fear.
Yep.
Yeah, and I was still pushing it, because in one 90-minute ride, I'd crash like 5 times. Yeah. So that was really annoying.
Yeah. So your new bike is the Pivot Mach 4 SL Team XTR with a 120 millimeter fork and Fox Live valve.
Yes.
So
that's a lot to say.
That's the whole thing.
That's how I should describe it all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Please say that entire name. So yeah, right. Real smooth, rolls off the tongue. So this has a 34 step cast fork, which just means that it's a little bit bulkier. It's like they're bigger diameter tubes. That means it's going to be a little bit stiffer, which I think is actually really important since you're a taller and bigger rider. When you have a 32 millimeter fork in the front, things get a little spindly. It's kind of like you have a couple chopsticks out there and they flap all around. And then it's got that live valve suspension, which means that it has like a whole wired system with accelerometers and everything else so that it can, I think it's 1,000 hertz or 1,000 times a second. It can change. I think it's 1,000.
It takes 3 milliseconds. It says
both your front and rear suspension. I didn't realize it was the front also. I saw the wires running too. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
To open or close the valve for suspension.
And then you can set what that threshold or valving change feels like with like 5 different settings, right? Yep. So it's really cool, and I think it's something that we're going to see on all bikes moving forward at some point. All of them are going to have these sort of systems, which is pretty neat.
Doesn't this sound so me?
100%. It's on brand. 100% on brand. But let's talk about the initial setup, because we do get a lot of questions from people about like, I just got a mountain bike, how do I set it up? Or people that have ridden a long time and don't know how.
Okay, one step back. The reason why we got this bike for me, because there's a lot of choices. We wanted... Jonathan's. I have Jonathan here, so when I say we, Jonathan's my mountain bike equipment coach. That we wanted a bike that was cross-country enabled, that's light, but also more raked out in the front, so that on downhills I'm not going to lose as much time, and I'm getting actually a lot better on downhills.
Yeah, he's fast. He's actually fast.
I'm okay. I can like ride with mountain bikers now.
Yeah, if you're listening to this though, like there's like a section of trail that we rode at North Star where I was pushing really hard, and Nate was just right in front of me.
Right behind you or right in front of you?
You were right in front of me. It's just the top section of coaster.
Yeah.
But you're fast.
Cool.
So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's what it is. It's a little more raked out, but and then also pedal efficiency with the live valve. So light bike that, and then little shorter chain stays. Kind of the combo that we thought would be good for me.
Super nerdy stuff, just to get it out of the way really quick, but 67.5 degree head tube angle is what you have with a 120 millimeter fork on this bike.
And before I was 110. Was I 100?
You were 100.
I was 100 on the Epic.
Yeah.
So this though with the live valve,
like 70, I think. So like really upright.
It can make it feel very like you have a you're very efficient while you're pedaling because it doesn't like compress very much. But then when it's open, you feel like you actually do have a 120. So that's, to me, that sounds so awesome.
It's like the best of both worlds.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Super smart.
But there's some setup. Well, I haven't really worked too much on setup issues, but we want to talk about it because I think everyone has setup issues on a mountain bike unless you're like a Jonathan.
Well, yeah. Well, I do too.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, for sure. So this is a new bike. And this is just initial impressions. It's not like this is like the verdict on the bike, right? Like this is how it will behave forever.
Oh, yeah.
So just a good disclaimer to get out of the way. And you go through this process all the time with road bikes, TT bikes. Every person that we saw at Kona, they had refined their setup so much over time, and that's just the process that you go through.
Mountain biking, there's even more.
So what's the problem you're experiencing on the trail?
So when I am climbing something steep or going through a switchback, switchbacks are steep, my front wheel lifts.
I'm going to play devil's advocate. Just lean forward, Nate. Actually, I'll just read from your Strava comments. Just lean forward. That's what a lot of people say.
I am, I can't say it the way I described to you guys before, but I am as far forward on that seat that there's the contact point on my rear end is very minimal, and I am bent over all the way that I wouldn't be able to pedal if I was bent over anymore.
Chest is low, right?
As low as possible.
Yeah, yep.
I am like doing a 40K TT, like all the way bent over, and still doing a wheelie through a switchback.
Cool. So
like a unicycle.
Body position. That's not the
I'm
problem.
not just leaning back. Like
chopper style.
Yeah, chopper style.
We'll have to get that photo that you took of your bike and post it in the forum for this episode so people can see it.
Let's get a new one here because the dropper post was down. I think that
changes the perspective for people. So we'll get a picture and we'll put it up in the forum. Producer Tucker will do that. Thanks, Tucker.
So what do you do, Jonathan, if your front wheel picks up while you're climbing and your body position isn't terrible?
So that has me thinking that you're, even though right now your body position is low and far forward, it's all relative to where your hands can be placed on the handlebars. I think that you should look at a longer stem and or lower stack to get yourself so that basically, if you look at where your hands are, they would just drift down and closer to that front wheel. We're not talking down to the front wheel, or just relatively speaking. Because right now, since you're so tall, the stack that you have on that bike, and you'll see this in the picture, it puts in the short stem, I think it's a 60 millimeter stem, or may even be a 50. It's pretty short. Yeah. But your hands are like, if you drew the line from the axle up the fork through the head tube and all the way up, it's like a straight line. It's almost like you have a 0 length stem, right? Because your stack is so high that your stem is placed in a spot where it's almost like your stem is like backwards and behind the steering tube. So as a result, like no matter what you do with your body, you'll never be able to really get that weight as far forward as it should be. So I think that we should try lowering your stack, but lengthening your stem for sure.
Should I do lowering the stack before I buy a new stem? Because it's just taking spacers out?
Totally. That's the easy thing.
Well, how many spacers should somebody do at a time when they're doing this?
One at a time. Well, actually, it depends. If you have really small spacers, you're probably not going to notice a huge difference. And if you also know that you're a person that doesn't notice big like changes on bikes, go two big spacers or go a big difference and then work your way back from there to feel more comfortable.
And when we first set this up, so the steer tube hasn't been cut or anything, and the bike shop guy who set it up just put it at the top. So there could be a lot of room to go. And I was kind of like pressed for time as normal. I was just like, new bike. Oh, it's going outside right now.
Yeah, exactly.
I just read online some like what PSI I should do and got the sag sort of right, and was like out the door.
Yeah.
So I didn't spend the kind of time and care that somebody should when setting up a mountain bike.
Yeah. So if a person feels like this sort of thing happening, first do a body position check. Are you really leaning forward and moving your pelvis forward and doing everything that you can? Then if that's the case and it's still wanting to lift when you're in like really steep switchbacks and turns, then it's probably worth you looking into extending your reach out a little bit and maybe dropping the stack, and that'll help.
And then we're also going to look at Lee McCormick's RAD.
It's a really good way to figure it out, which he just measures from basically the center of the bottom bracket to the center point of where your hands are on the handlebars. And this is the same thing that Sam Hill does as well for any bike. That's basically the measurement he cares about. That's it. That's the most important thing. And if you have that figured out, it's actually pretty liberating because you can find out that you can use a medium, or you could use a large, or you could do something else. And it's just you change the stem as a result of that.
You just carry that from bike to bike? Is that the idea?
Yeah, exactly. And the way that he figures that out is really clever with his rip row. When you're basically in that standing position where you're standing straight up and hands are on the handlebars, you don't want to have your shoulders shrugged. You want them to, in that position, your shoulders are slightly tugged down, I would say. And in that position, it's really easy for you to measure the RAD, as he calls it, which I can't remember the exact acronym, but it's probably something awesome and shredly. And then you can use that measurement to figure it out.
Feet to your handlebars, pretty much.
That's it.
So what he says is that if it's like what you want is that if you're completely rowing, like going off a jump or something, I'm doing it wrong, but that should be the distance. Like if you have the handlebars all the way pulled in, you're rowing off a jump. Like think of like a BMXer. That should be the same. So then when you're anti-rowing and out, that distance will feel good.
Yes.
And you don't actually need the rip row to measure this. You can just put handlebars in your hand and measure it.
Yep. It just makes it easier.
Feet to handlebars is a better way to describe that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, the hard thing about measuring feet to handlebars, which I guess you could, but it's nice measuring bottom bracket.
Well, if you're on a bike, if we're talking about the rip row, then it's feet to handlebars.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you can also measure a bike that you like. And then say, I wish I had my Epic because I like that position. I would have measured that and then try to mimic that on the pivot.
Yeah. Which sometimes it will change slightly. I know Lee might disagree with this to a certain extent, but I've found that it does change a little bit. Like, for example, it's a little bit longer on my cross-country bike than it is on my enduro bike.
Does he contend that it should carry bike to bike regardless of changes in geometry?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. But I actually like one just slightly longer on my cross-country bike. I don't feel like I'm doing quite as many big leverage moves as I am on the enduro bike, and it feels better when I'm climbing.
So one fear that I have is even with that, it's not going to do it because my seat post is so high and the angle, it makes that seat so far back.
Yep.
I'm going to have the seat slammed all the way forward. Would the next thing be like to get a flipped
seat post?
Offset forward? Because if that happened, I feel like that would really help.
Yeah, so that's the hard thing. So like mountain bike manufacturers are making bikes with steeper seat tube angles, gravel bike companies too now, and even road bike companies. And basically that means that instead of if you're to look at from your bottom bracket going up to your saddle, instead of it leaning backward, it's getting more and more upright.
Which
and
I like.
It's great. It positions you over the bottom bracket a little bit more, which then, since bikes are getting longer in the front, it makes it so that you can get more weight on the front end for handling. And this is road bike too, right? Like when you're going through a turn, that sort of stuff, it's good to have a lot of weight on that front wheel. But when you're really tall, like Nate is, and you have so much seat post, it still puts you really far behind because you just have so much seat post extending out there. So the hard thing is I can't think of a dropper post with offset, really. You know what I mean? So like
if it has an offset, could you turn it around?
You could, yeah.
Okay, cool. Because I bought a fall 9.8 one. It's coming in with 0 offset.
Yeah.
Probably shouldn't have done that.
I
should have got the 15 millimeter
Did they make
offset.
a 15 mil offset
they do.
one? You might be able to just get the top attachment for it and flip it around then.
Ooh, good idea.
That might be a thing you could do. And then as long as it's still, when it's flipped, allows that angle.
Yeah,
because some of them
that's
will
what
be
I was worried
limited on angles and you might not be able to hit it. But yeah, it's a problem that tall people face.
Because descending, having more stack and a shorter stem makes it feel better, right?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it basically gives you a little bit more leverage, and it makes the bike feel a little more stable, strangely, too, even though you have more leverage. So it just requires less input from you, and then the bike also just is more calm. So, yeah,
So maybe I'll try both. Well, I'll try this dropping the spacers first.
Yeah, stack first. That's super easy. Then you can work on reach with the bars, which I know when you drop stack, like spacers out, you affect stack and reach. I know that, but mainly you're affecting stack when you drop spacers out. So it's the best place to start. Okay. We got a lot of things to cover. Can we cover one more little personal thing? I just started my training for 2020.
Woo!
It's exciting. Yeah. I'm excited.
Cool.
I built out a glide path of sorts because once again, we're nerds, right? And I built out a glide path for where I need to be in terms of power and weight to get to my goal for nationals, which is basically at 4,500 feet in elevation where we're at here. I want to be at a 340 FTP and then be weighing roughly 143 pounds, which is like race weight for me.
Put your watts per kg where?
5.2, just under 5.3. 5.25.
Which puts you up with the...
I think I need that to even have a chance at a win.
2 guys? Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's just they're really fast. So, and right now I should be around 308. I think is the predicted number that I have in my glide path. And I just took a ramp test, and I'm 306.
So you're behind.
I'm behind.
How are you adjusting? Just kidding.
Yeah, I'm 2 watts behind, but that's pretty darn close to where I thought. And the reason that
Based on one test day.
Yeah,
You might not be behind at all.
Right, exactly right.
And he just came back from elevation.
Yes, yeah.
2 weeks at
sea level. Yeah.
Right.
So
yeah, I'm still reeling.
yeah.
it's rough, right?
So many things about that trip were rough. So many. The riding, the drinking, the lack of sleep, the constant social engagement. It was a tough week.
Demanding stuff.
Fun in a lot of ways, but
the reason that I want to
taxing.
cover this, and producer Tucker is going to put the link to my ramp test in the forum, so then you can see this. Is so I get this question on every single workout I do on Strava by many people. So I think I should just change my name to include these things. But yes, I do every workout on the rollers. No, I don't miss erg mode. It's fine. Erg mode's fine, but it's also fine without it. And that includes all workouts. So I was doing the ramp test on that, and I got to the point at the final step where I was like 20 minutes in, and things were very much cross-eyed, blurry, and not really in color anymore. And I was getting pretty out of it. And the thought of like picking up leg speed, it was just wasn't happening. And I thought, well, I have another gear. I'm just going to grab another gear and try to hold what I'm holding, and we'll see if it works. And it lasted for about 40 seconds. So the power went, like I stepped above the actual step for the last 47 seconds, I think. Nate.
Don't say anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Sounds good. Yeah, totally. So
he's going to give away trade secrets. But.
Okay, got it. Yeah, it sounds good. But just the same, with that, it's still an accurate test.
Yes, it's great.
That's the important thing.
It's a good test, and it's close enough for what you need to use it for.
Yep, exactly right. So, if you have more questions, slide into my DMs.
He didn't ruin his test. I've thought of this.
That's the
gist
point.
of it. Yep.
Okay, let's get into, let's cover the job postings later on. How about that? Let's go into
There's so many
Ian's.
updates. We don't have any things. Oh, later on, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Ian's question. It says, hey guys, I've been thinking, so Alberto Salazar from the Nike Oregon Project has been in trouble for doping his athletes. They're using too much L-Carnitine and infusing it intravenously, which is not okay with WADA. This is written by Ian here. He says, but presumably the effects of L-Carnitine must be legit enough for them to be using it at all. I've looked into it myself and found mixed results in some research papers. Do you have any thoughts on this, on its use? And he says legally via oral tablets available at the drugstore. He says it's effectively claimed to boost the use of fat as fuel, and as endurance athletes, it should appeal to us all, right? Keep up the good work. So first things first, I just want to clarify a bit on the Salazar thing, if that's okay.
Yep.
So first of all, they've been banned from coaching athletes.
Oh, so who is he?
Yes, so he's actually back in the day a runner from Cuba, very fast runner, but then went
world
through
record holder, a couple. How do you do it in the Olympics? I know he's won Boston, I think 3 times in a row.
Yeah, he's legit.
Or New York, one of the. Either way, he's
went through a whole stretch of health problems. Yeah. So he's a very good athlete.
He's not legit.
Very good athlete. He went through a whole quite a long period of health problems and everything else, but he's been coaching athletes for some time now. He's a famed coach.
So he's a running coach.
Yes, and the Nike Oregon project is, Google it, you'll see a lot of stuff. It's basically the whole mission of that was to make American distance runners competitive at the top global level again. That was really the main goal of it. But he's trained athletes outside of the U.S. Mo Farah, most famously, I think, and Galen Rupp and some fast athletes that he's trained. So Alberto Salazar and Dr. Jeffrey Brown were both incriminated in this whole process, and lots of investigations for like the past 15 or 20 years, basically, that have been going into this. And they both received bans, but they received them for 3 reasons. And I'm trying to stick to the books on this one rather than drawing any inference, because I think there's a bit of that in Ian's question. Number 1, trafficking an illegal substance. That was one reason. And it's assumed that what they're talking about with this one is androgel, and that's like a topical male hormone, right? So testosterone, and a gel that you basically just put onto your skin. So the interesting part with this really quick is, so either this is a very clever cover, or this is also them being very heads up. Okay. So, basically there were emails in between the Nike CEO and Salazar where they were talking about this gel, and they were trying to find the legal limit where they could basically use this, and then where you would get popped for doping.
Yep.
And Salazar claimed he was using the drug test to find its legal limit, to understand the risks they could face if somebody tried to sabotage their athletes. And what he's talking about here is put a dollop of it in your palm and then shake a runner's hand afterward and say, like, great job. They go to testing and then they get it. Because they were also, to be fair, they were talking about how long it would take for it to show up in the system, that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. They were also talking about doing it with a handshake versus, like patting somebody on the shoulder, like rubbing them on the shoulder, something like that, and seeing if it would change. So that's reason number 1 for trafficking that substance, and it's an illegal substance. Reason number 2 is tampering of patient records. With Wrights and Hines records, it showed that he received a legal amount of L-Carnitine, but it looks like that was added in and falsified. So it's kind of interesting because they were receiving that from a doctor. And then also Steve Magnus's records were altered, and it seems to infer that other people's were too, but those 2 were mentioned. And then reason 3, illegally administering or attempted to administer a supplement to multiple athletes. Now, it doesn't actually say clearly what the substance is and then what substances aren't involved in this part, but it definitely is implied that L-Carnitine is like the main offender that they were talking about in terms of administering or attempting to administer the supplement. Seems that way, yeah. So 1, trafficking an illegal substance. 2, tampering of records. 3, illegally administering those substances. So that's the background on Salazar. Mm-hmm. But so then we can separate that. Let's just get into L-Carnitine and what it does.
Yep.
So does it make you faster?
Well, okay. So L-Carnitine has its purported benefits, right? And if you'll permit me to go a little off track here for just a minute, I want to cover a topic that I've wanted to cover a number of times. I also wanted a reason to research it, and so I spent a little extra research, built upon what I knew already, and we're not even going to talk about L-Carnitine for a few minutes because we need to return back to lactate for just a short while. We totally are.
Does it have to do with IPAs?
It doesn't. No.
Okay.
No. So, again, one of the purported benefits of carnitine, not doping, supplementing, is that it reduces it accelerates the clearance of lactate post-workout. And I've always struggled with that. I've never understood what is the hurry. I mean, it's going to clear the bloodstream and potentially the muscles. 30 to 60 minutes is typically what you read. So why are we in this all-fire hurry to get lactate off of the muscles post-workout? What exactly is the benefit of that? Because it's touted a lot, not just with carnitine, but with a lot of things. So let's talk about lactate. And I think why lactate is demonized the way it is because it's tied to blood acidification, because the whole increase in hydrogen ions that takes place simultaneously, yada, yada. And it's this blood acidification that, if anything, I could see them wanting to reduce that post-workout, because that probably does lead to cellular stress, cellular damage, and impedes the healing process, the recovery process. So I get that. So let's talk instead about this acidosis rather than the lactate. And I'll tie lactate in where it comes along. But let's understand that this acidosis occurs because of hydrogen, not because of lactate. Lactate is not the culprit. Okay? So two forms of acidosis. One is respiratory acidosis, and that's basically the buildup of carbon dioxide in the blood. And that can happen for a number of reasons. One's poor lung function. So it could be a disease state. It could just be lack of training or lack of conditioning in the respiratory muscles. Listen to the Canadians too much, respiratory. And it could just be depressed breathing. And that could be a conscious thing. That can be a fatigue thing. That can just be a thing you're not even aware of, that you don't emphasize your breathing, that you don't effectively clear the CO2 when you're exercising. And there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there people don't recognize. The other form of acidosis is metabolic acidosis, and this basically has to do with energy turnover. So we're all very familiar with this because this is what we experience during exercise, especially higher intensity exercise. And this comes down to a couple of things. One is the loss or the depletion of our bicarbonate buffer. So bicarbonate comes in a lot of forms, I think 7. It's always tied to a salt, in this case, sodium. So when we think about that AMP gel that we rub on our skin and the baking soda that athletes have actually eaten in the past.
Yeah, prior to our records, famously.
Yeah. So bicarbonate goes down, metabolic acidosis increases. The other form is lactic acid buildup. And I've already made it clear that I'm not real fond of the term lactic acid. It's basically exercise-induced acidosis. That's more technically correct. So one thing we've recognized, and I think everybody agrees on, scientists, athletes, coaches, et cetera, is that lactate is fuel. So we know this, and I don't think anybody argues this anymore. I mean, you take a glucose, split it in half, you get lactate. It's literally half of a glucose molecule. It's still fuel. And what we know now, and maybe learned recently, is that lactate itself doesn't actually reduce blood pH. So it's not even directly responsible for this blood acidification that happens. Evidence is steering us toward the fact that it it protects against intracellular acidosis. So within the cells, we're actually getting a positive alkalizing benefit from lactate. So it's actually helping us avoid the acidosis that we're criticizing it for causing. And this is because the lactate itself, when it exits the cell, takes a hydrogen ion along with it. So it's co-transported out of the cell. If any of this is interesting to you and you want to study up on it further, George A. Brooks over at UC Berkeley is kind of the resource on these matters.
Cool.
So again, the point is that exercise-induced acidosis may actually be an alkalizing, or the presence of lactate may actually be an alkalizing agent. So it's helping us.
Interesting.
Cool is a relative term.
I think it is. We're all nerds here, right?
And I'll be quick with this, but in further defense of lactate, if you look at Ferguson in 2017, got it right here. So in the European Journal of Applied Physiology, reliable journal, Brian Ferguson and colleagues, just December of 2017, so recently noted that lactate is a readily combusted fuel that is shuttled throughout the body, and it is a potent signal for angiogenesis. So that right there. There's one thing in its favor. If it does further angiogenesis, which is the building of blood vessels, in particular capillaries, so the exchange of nutrients and waste products down at the muscle bed, if we can enhance that, which is one of the things we chase with endurance adaptation, endurance training, why wouldn't we? So there's one vote in the favor of lactate. Another is Nalbandian and Takeda, 2016 review. Studies suggest glucose can be synthesized from lactate in the muscle. Glycogen replenishment facilitates glycogen replenishment. Another vote in favor of lactate, or at least
seems logical.
Support that we can't demonize it. That's
demonize.
the word. Other studies show that it may play a role in muscle cell myogenesis, which is the muscle cell formation. May promote differentiation in satellite cells, so anabolic signaling going on here. So satellite cells outside of the muscle produce more muscle cells. Basically, they both play a role in muscle growth. Potential role in neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to process experiences, form memories, etc. And it is not tied to DOMS. So again, all these times we see that lactate is blamed for an increase in DOMS. Again, show me the science, show me one time, and we can have a conversation. Until then, I'm just going to say it does not. So to conclude, it's an indirect regulator of muscle acidosis. So actually tones down the acidosis it's blamed for. It is an energy source. It interacts with signaling pathways that can affect a number of anabolic activities. And really, that's it. So why is there a priority on clearing it from the muscles?
Yeah.
So if someone can explain that to me and show me the other side of it, why we're so intent on getting it out of the muscle.
I'll tell you.
Okay.
People want to sell stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
So
sure. So let's get back to L-Carnitine.
Ding, ding, ding.
But let me. So I'm just going to paraphrase what you're saying. Is that all the products that tell you that it's going to like improve lactate buffering?
Yeah.
You don't want that.
Yes.
Like maybe it doesn't even do what it says it does.
Right.
But I think in maybe the 80s and 90s, that was like everyone thought that's what you should be doing.
For sure. Yep.
There was a lot of products and stuff that talked about it.
Why is it still hanging in there? But you just nailed it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So a lot of things.
Yeah.
So there you go. You're educated, Chad. You're welcome.
So with all that, I feel like
could have saved me about 5 hours.
I feel like the assumption of the utility of L-Carnitine is like blown out of the water now.
No, there's more.
Okay.
No, there's much more actually. So L-Carnitine. First, let's clarify why it's L-Carnitine. Why isn't it just referred to as carnitine? So there's 2 isomers of carnitine, which is same molecular composition. It's just different arrangement of the atoms. One can be used by the body. One has no place in the body. So the L-Carnitine is what the body uses. D-carnitine is the other one. We're not even going to talk about that one. 90% of it is stored in our muscles. So 90% of what we have on board is stored in our muscles. And it exists in animals as well. They have muscle tissue. And that's where we get most of our L-Carnitine is from animal sources. It's endogenously produced also. So we produce it in our bodies via the use of the amino acids lysine and methionine. So we have the capability to make our own carnitine. But excuse me, when it comes to exercise, our endogenous production cannot keep up with the demand. So especially as exercise intensity increases. So the harder we work, the faster we deplete carnitine. Hence the potential need for supplementation.
Got it.
Worth noting is that all essential amino acids originally come from plants. So keep that in mind. If you are a vegetarian or a vegan, you can still get all your EAAs just fine from a vegetarian diet. You don't have to, because you don't eat animal flesh doesn't mean you're going to be low on carnitine necessarily, unless there's a deficiency in the vegetable side of your diet. So what are some of the functions of L-Carnitine? I trimmed it down to 4. I'm going to elaborate on a couple of them, touch on the others, but primarily it's fatty acid transport, or what's called translocation. It takes fatty acids from outside the cell, puts it inside the cell. And this happens blood to mitochondria. So L-Carnitine in the blood or in the muscle, free fatty acids. Free fatty acids in the blood need to make it into the cell and then into the mitochondria. L-Carnitine facilitates this transaction. So put another way, it stimulates fat metabolism, quite simply.
That's good. And that's what a lot of people want.
It's actually really good in the context of endurance athletes, because if you recall when we touched on aerobic respiration, anaerobic respiration, when we process or just cell respiration, when we process carbohydrate, we get on the order of 30, 35 ATP per molecule of glucose, whereas with a single molecule of fatty acid, we get about 3 times that much, sometimes more, depending on the length of the free fatty acid chain.
It's just more difficult to break down.
A ton of energy. Right? Takes longer to break down, but it's far more efficient fuel source. So the way it works is fatty acids that are stored in our adipose tissue are broken down. They make it into the blood. They bind to albumin. Albumin just basically brings them to the cell, and then carnitine shuttles the free fatty acids into the mitochondria.
Got it.
So that's the process. And that's largely what we're concerned with here. But let me also mention that it inhibits lactate accumulation. And basically anything that's going to shift us towards fat, which doesn't produce lactate as a byproduct, is going to reduce lactate accumulation.
Makes sense.
And in doing so is going to preserve glycogen. So we get that double whammy. Less lactate, more glycogen on board. So that's a good thing too.
Yeah.
Reduces metabolic waste accumulation during exercise. So forget about the post. This is during. So there's something called, there's another type of carnitine called acetyl L-carnitine, and this is more for the geeks, but it reduces that acetyl coenzyme A buildup that takes place in the mitochondria, such that, once that accumulation happens, you can't get more pyruvate in, lactate builds up. So either way, it all reduces that accumulation. And I'll touch on this later, it prevents PCR usage. So that immediate snap of energy we get from the ATP and the PCR that's stored on board in our muscles, it helps us preserve that by basically elevating aerobic metabolism, so we don't get to the point where we have to use those more short-term stores during the onset of intense exercise. So basically when we jump into something rapidly.
When you start quickly.
Yeah.
Gun goes off.
Solon's warm up, basically.
Got it.
And then very briefly, it's essential for normal heart function. Okay. So there's the upsides of L-Carnitine. But let's talk supplementation, because the key to this all is that our body produces it anyway, and we can get it through a regular diet. So why are we so intent on supplementing? And is there truly a benefit with supplementing?
I want to say something, because this is what really grinds my gears sometimes. So everything you said is true. Think about, so listening, you're like, oh, let me go on Amazon. I'm buying some right now.
No. I do this with every supplement I research. Like, why wouldn't I be on that?
Exactly. Think about it like with water. Like if Chad were here to tell you all the things that water does for you,
You'd be amazing.
Like they took athletes, they didn't give them water, and they had them run for a very long time. And then you think, whoa, maybe I should supplement with water. I mean, maybe I should do 3 gallons a day, 5 gallons a day.
Yeah.
So just mechanisms is not outcome. So although we understand the mechanisms, now let's see if can we impact the outcome based on either supplementation or timing or stuff like that, or loading. That's so just because there are mechanisms that improve doesn't mean you can impact it yourself. Sometimes it's just the way it is.
Well said.
That's a good point.
So look for outcome stuff rather than just people who only talk about mechanisms. Because if Chad was selling L-Carnitine right now, he'd end it right there. Yeah, be like, there you go.
Daddy Warbucks.
$29.99.
Yeah, give you a link on the site to the kind of like best, and we'd go. We'd
the most
move on to the
expensive
next
kind.
question. Oh, absolutely.
It's
my
it's,
brand.
it's
Actually,
ionized.
TrainerRoad branded.
Yeah,
exactly.
It goes through a special 12-step proprietary process.
Exactly.
Sorry.
Sounds so
it's
familiar.
more absorbable. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so what are the claims of the benefits of supplementing? One of them is that it may attenuate deleterious effects of hypoxic training, which could have some relevance if you're going to either compete or train at altitude. Speeds up recovery from exercise stress, and I see that a lot, and this is another one of those broad statements that I think just reels people in. Oh, I got to have that. It'll make me recover faster.
Yeah.
And then to that end, they say that it plays a decisive role, and this is directly quoted from one of the studies I reviewed or looked at, plays a decisive role in prevention of cell damage. And I always take that to mean, or at least in this case, if we're seeing more oxidation, then there's going to be more oxidative damage, or at least the potential for it. So maybe this has a positive effect on the antioxidant system, and we see an uptick in our antioxidant response. That's all I got on that. That's my best going theory. Get a little more esoteric on this. It helps us stockpile acetyl groups, and this is for the biochemistry nerds. But this can prevent that energy deficit that I was just talking about that leads to us using those really short-term energy supplies. And then also, and without going into what beta-alanine is, because I think that's probably a topic for later, it's going to be we've been asked to talk about it, and I do actually want to look into it a little more and share some learnings. But it is a beta-alanine precursor, which could have some short power implications.
Got it.
As an endurance athlete, I mean, we're not immune to the need for short power. I mean, we, especially as mass start racers, mountain bikers, et cetera, there's plenty of short power.
Even look at the full distance triathletes when they have to make a pass. Like Nate Zarlengo was mentioning the fact that he had to make a pass and he just didn't really have it in the tank to make the pass as fast as he needed to, right?
Yeah, sure.
And he got penalized. Like everybody needs that, you know?
Yeah.
Another thing that grinds my gears. A lot of times, and it depends on the type of racing. Ironman probably not as much, but in our racing, crit, and mountain biking, it's who can burn the most carbohydrates for the shortest amount of time, like for a short amount of time, who wins the race.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a way to think of it, for sure.
It's who can do the kilojoules within 1 minute.
Yeah, that's a
and normally
perfect way to frame it.
Yeah, and so if you prevent yourself, like if you become very fat adapted, that's great for long, slow stuff like Leadville, or maybe long Ironman stuff. But if your race is 5 minutes or 1 minute, like that, were most races, that's the key part of it.
Sure.
Or maybe 15
Those
seconds.
are the pivotal moments.
Yeah, you want as many kilojoules and everything firing, everything blowing up. But you also have to get there in a state that you have some fuel left.
100%.
Yeah, you got to be good at both.
Short-term energy preservation.
2 for 2, Nate. It's fantastic.
So many things grinds my gear.
Good contribution.
We could have a whole podcast about this.
What grinds Nate's drivetrain?
Let's do it. Okay, so let's talk about the research history briefly. So initially, they tried administering additional carnitine to athletes via pill or powder form, and it had no effect, no positive effect. So basically, interest in it died. I think it's like back in the 90s.
I think that's how you can I mean, you can get L-Carnitine at the drugstore in pill form is what I've seen.
Yep.
Yeah, they did a lot.
And why is it still there? Is the question. And I'm going to tell you.
You did a lot of like 2 to 3 gram supplementations for 6 to 12 weeks. Then they looked to see, did it increase in the muscles versus the people who did and didn't have it. They looked at performance. Did that change?
And typically it didn't
Yep.
in either respect until they realized that it has to be accompanied with insulin. A dose of insulin along with the carnitine actually pushes it into the muscle. It happens over the long term. I'll elaborate on that in a second. But without this influx in insulin, which, how do you cause insulin to increase but ingest carbohydrate, then there was no effect. But as soon as they started matching it, or at least intaking it with carbohydrate, then they started to see increases in muscular, the amount stored in the muscle. So, and this was, if I recall correctly, kind of learned by accident, but they had, I think they're actually using insulin at the time. I can't remember what the details of the situation are, but they learned that that's the key. That's how we do it. But what's more important is that it has to be done over quite a long period of time. It doesn't happen quickly. And I think Salazar, the article that you showed me, talked about how he was advising the athletes, get on this right now.
Yeah,
because it's not going to happen.
Like 6 months to a year in advance.
Yeah.
It's sort of thing.
Yeah,
they
and
were
that's about what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So
and he also mentioned, interestingly, with it, this all makes sense, but he said for milers, he was unsure if it was going to help a miler, for example, but he was really saying for you marathoners, this is something that we
I don't know why I
need to get on.
A mile's still very aerobic. I mean, it's a short, sub 4 minutes potentially, but that's still a big aerobic draw.
Yep, it is.
So it turned out that carnitine plus insulin increased muscle concentrations on the order of somewhere between 15 to 30%. So it was a hefty uptick. But this was supplementing 2 to 3 grams a day for at least 12 weeks. And I say at least 12 weeks because even at 12 weeks, they hadn't seen any evidence of an uptick. It wasn't more toward the end of this study, which was, I think, 24 weeks. So 168 days, quite long.
So they saw an uptake, but did they see a performance difference?
Yeah, right. So they did. So what most studies cite when they talk about carnitine supplementation is there's an increase in oxygen uptake, and there's going to be more aerobic metabolism if we're burning more free fatty acids, and there's going to be an increase in the amount of oxygen utilized, which also means there's going to be a decrease in the respiratory quotient. So that whole thing that we measured when we did our basal rates and our was down at 0.7 means you're burning primarily fat or maybe entirely fat, whatever, all the way up at 1.0, then it shifts more towards or entirely towards carbohydrate. So, and somehow that's tied to enhanced recovery, which maybe has to do with the prevention of the cell damage that I talked about earlier with enhanced antioxidant defense. So anyway, the study that I just talked about, 24 weeks long, which translates to 168 days, 2 grams twice a day. So they were splitting it up along with 80 grams of carbohydrate, and that's the key. They supplemented with a little less carbohydrate in one study where they used protein. They're only doing 40 grams of carbohydrate, 40 grams of protein, and they weren't seeing the same effects. In fact, they weren't seeing effects at all.
Wait, how much carbohydrate did they have with it?
80 grams.
Wow.
It's a hefty amount.
That's a hefty amount.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So what happened with this is, like I said, at 12 weeks, they saw no increase in the content, the muscle content of carnitine, but at 24 weeks, they saw about a 20% increase across their athletes. So they tested this 30 minutes at a light workload at roughly 35% VO2 max. So we're talking like, 50% of threshold. Then for the next 30 minutes, they increased it to 50% of VO2 max. So maybe we're talking, about 85% of threshold-ish in that ballpark. Either way, not a heavy amount of work, but at this point, this is when glycogen starts to get used, but they were using less glycogen. So more free fatty acids are probably making it into the cells and being utilized as energy. Then at 30 minutes, or the next 30 minutes, so they're 60 minutes into this. Now the final 30 minutes, they have them go effectively all out, but it's 30-minute effort, so it's not going to be totally full gas, which they pushed up to about 80% of VO2 max, which is in the ballpark of threshold. So they sat there and they saw less lactate production. Again, if we're metabolizing more free fatty acids, we're not generating as much lactate as we would if it were glucose, less lactate accumulation.
That's good.
So there was an effect. Yeah.
No,
so
but lactate's good.
Yeah, exactly. And then another study, 2013, for 3 months, twice a day, 1.5 grams plus the 80 grams of carbohydrate. And they saw an increase in muscle carnitine levels, an increase in fat-stimulating gene expression, in particular, if anyone cares, carnitine acyltransferases. And then a random study that I couldn't, all I got was a little blip on it. was that, and I already mentioned this, when they accompanied it with protein, they saw no effect, but they did it with a decrease in the amount of carbohydrate administered. So if they had maybe done 80 grams of carbohydrate plus 40 grams of protein and gotten all the carbohydrate necessary, maybe that protein would have facilitated the uptake. We'll never know unless someone else does a similar study.
What do you know? You said 80 grams of glucose. Do you know what they used?
Different in different cases. It was liquid form in that first study, so the 24-week study.
This was before they worked out, or when? Do you know during the time of day?
It doesn't really matter. I mean, when you supplement pre-workout, post-workout, I'm clearly not going to do it during the workout.
Well, I wouldn't do it during. I think it's all the times that I would eat 80 grams of like pretty much gels.
Okay, so maybe that's a good time to do it because that's an easy time
hour
to accompany it with that much carbohydrate. But the point is,
especially fast.
This accumulates over such a slow span or a long span of time.
I'm trying to think. You would need the insulin spike, and I wouldn't eat 80 grams of, even me, 80 grams of like pure sugar anytime during the day.
Quite a lot.
Yeah. But I would during an hour of sweet spot. Like, and I would sip a bottle through an hour and have that 80 grams. Like you could put in your Martan thing.
Yeah, totally.
Bottle.
It's 80 grams.
There's 89 or
80 grams per bottle. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind, if you guys are actually considering going down this road, let's talk about the risk of supplementation.
Yeah, let's talk about that and the methods.
Okay.
Yeah.
So first off, athlete responses vary widely. So you may be effectively a non-responder. So there's one thing, and that's always in play.
Right?
That's always in play, right? It is a supplement. So WADA's not going to test it, and they're not going to endorse it.
Yeah, I looked it up on, you can go to globodro.com, and it is not prohibited. It's amino acid. They're not going to prohibit an amino acid.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, that'd be kind of hard, especially when your body produces naturally.
Yeah, and it's available in so many sources, so many dietary sources that people are already consuming. Sure. There is a potential for overdose, but this typically comes in doses as high as 6 grams per day.
Thank you for telling me that.
I figured you, of all people, need to hear that. And the problem there is that it elevates something called TMO, which is trimethylamine N oxide. And yep, that's right. The issue being that it increases your cardiovascular disease risk.
Oh, well, I'm not going to do it then.
So a bit of a downside.
Yes.
On the high end.
Downside.
Just a bit.
Just
on the high end. And then also recognize that the body sufficiently produces this endogenously. So any supplementation can carry side effects. And I always have to chuckle when I hear the term side effects because they're just other effects. There's the effect you desire, and then these things get relegated to side effects when they're just also effects. I mean, these all happen, but that's the one I want, so that's the one I'm going to call the main effect, and then everything else gets tabled as a side effect.
That grinds Chad's gears right there.
It absolutely does. It's not a side effect. It's
Totally.
another effect. It's just not the one you want to celebrate.
Yeah, it's not the one you sell, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's enough for me to say no.
Yeah.
I don't need any heart disease.
And then, so what? 2 pages of notes there, and then I got 4 lines that basically talked you out of it. And I'm happy to hear that because, again, I mean, what's the risk-reward ratio here?
Yeah. And that's what you have to ask with all supplements that you're taking in, everything else like that. Even, everything.
And there are portions of the population that have low L-Carnitine that need to supplement. And it's like heart patients.
And that's when supplementation makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
Your body's not up to the task.
But for us healthy people,
eating
I'm not I'm not a pro athlete, right? So like these Nike athletes,
they're absolutely splitting hairs on hairs, right?
If they're testing testosterone through skin, which is dangerous in general, like the gel.
And see, this is when performance comes at a higher priority than good health. And I've always struggled with that, even in high-level athletes.
One thing that Brian says is that they wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't effective. Brian, I think we have plenty of examples through pro athletic history
of plenty of things
of athletes doing things that one had no impact, and 2 are super dangerous for their health.
Yes.
Sometimes no impact and super dangerous for their health.
Yeah, we can do a whole episode on that.
Yeah. So happens all the time.
Just because a pro does it doesn't mean 1, it's safe, or 2, that it's even effective. Because they're looking for 0.5%. And they'll do anything.
I mean, look at it. Yeah, look at how close these running races are.
Age groupers will do anything, right? Let alone people trying to make $1 million or be a world record in the history, get a gold medal.
A career and a reputation riding on it. Yeah.
Not saying that all of you do that either. There's plenty of clean pros and stuff. I'm just saying the desire is high, so don't think that they researched it all and are weighing the cost benefits or anything like that.
Yeah, but it's definitely easy to think that they're doing everything right, and they must be doing everything for a very perfect reason that we don't know.
So, for instance, I take tart cherry juice. I'm kind of like on the science if it's really going to help me be a faster athlete, but I like the taste.
It's good,
and
it's delicious. It helps you sleep. And, it does carry antioxidants.
But it doesn't mean it's going to make me faster cyclist.
Yeah, true.
But there's a chance.
You're
saying there's a chance.
I know. And so for me, the cost benefit of that is there's probably a benefit to the antioxidants for my long-term health. It might be preventing aerobic adaptions, depending on when I take it. But it might make me sleep better. But I'm just saying that. Hope you get my bigger point is just because somebody does it doesn't mean that
it's not the most overt form of supplementation either. It's still in real food.
Yeah. It is real food.
It's cherry juice, yeah. So and dietary resources don't seem to have that same detrimental impact on your adaptation to oxidative stress.
Yep. Let's go into Brian's question.
Cool.
He says, I've been training for long endurance rides, including 70-mile Grand Fondos and Century rides. And he says, the tapering advice I've gotten from my coach looks a lot like the tapering plan from my younger brother that my younger brother gets from his coach for racing crits. So crits versus Grand Fondos, quite different sorts of racing. My intuition tells me that these are two very different types of events that require different tapering strategies. I understand that in each type of race taper, I will want to reduce volume, but maintain or increase intensity. But what kind of taper is appropriate for a Century and Grand Fondo or endurance road race, etc.?
This is a great question.
A fantastic
Good
question.
job, Brian.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, way to go. So where do you want to start with this one first, I guess?
There's a lot to talk on here.
We do.
It's always contextual. You don't even need me to say that, but you have to consider the situation. I mean, is this an A event? Is it a training event? Are you a new athlete? Have you been doing this for years and years? What type of event is it? Criterium versus Grand Fondo versus something like a Century, because a Grand Fondo can be raced. Mm-hmm. I guess you can race a Century too.
I don't see many people not racing a Grand Fondo. You know what I mean? There's
sure.
Everyone's kind of giving it. You know.
Oh, yeah. That front group goes out fast, and everyone tries to stay with them until they can't do it anymore.
Yeah, exactly right. Yep,
so
then it becomes a Grand Fondo after that.
just here for the miles and the social engagement.
When we did Levi's Grand Fondo at like mile 95 or something, I don't know if you guys remembered, but we started going a little faster. You started to cramp, and I stopped. And this like 18-year-old kid started talking like smack to me about how like I just blew up and stuff. Like, oh, you did a good pull, but now you can't handle anymore. And like
95 miles in.
Yeah, and we're not racing. Like we're in the middle of it, like 1,000 out of 2,000 or whatever people.
Right.
And he just starts like telling me in the middle of Grand Fondo,
calling me out.
Yeah. And I'm like looking behind, waiting for you because you cramped.
I was oblivious to that. I was dropping so many F-bombs. I don't think I've ever cussed that much in my life. That was so much pain.
You weren't with us. It was on the way back. Do you remember you remember that, right? Do you remember the kid?
That whole ride is like one of my favorite days in memory.
I know. Because of Chad's misery.
Chad with the cramping and then taking hot shots and then feeling terribly sick, then cramping more. And then Nate suddenly getting a seventh wind at the end and going extremely fast at the end.
Yeah, which is probably what inspired the cramping, because I was just like verging on it.
And many of your
keeping it at
F-bombs.
bay. And then this guy got to up the pace in the closing 3 kilometers.
Well, we were going easy the whole time.
It was
It doesn't matter. It's a long day.
It was very enjoyable for me. I'm sorry, Chad, but it was greatly enjoyable for me. But to the point, the racing really, it's not also just about the event, but how you plan to ride the event, right? Mm-hmm. That's like kind of what we're getting at with that point there.
Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. And then do understand that with a taper, all we're trying to do is shed fatigue without costing ourselves fitness. Mm-hmm. That's the goal. So that can be accomplished a whole number of ways. But over the course of the taper, you also want to stay sharp for your event. So something like a Century doesn't require much sharpness. It really is just about eliminating fatigue, whereas something like a Criterium or a mass start event where you're going to be doing a lot of high intensity efforts absolutely does require some preparatory efforts.
Mm-hmm. Stuff that's similar to what you're going to face on race day.
Yeah, and not even openers, but just something that keeps you in touch, both physiologically and psychologically with what it's like to go that hard. Mm-hmm. Keeps the energy systems online. Mm-hmm. And then you can't underplay the importance of the learning process. I mean, if you've done this a couple times, you should pick something up every single time you do it. And if you're doing multiple types of events, you're going to have to apply those learning to each of those types of events too, because as we are discussing, different types of tapers are necessary for different types of events. Mm-hmm. But still, the overarching theme is that you're trying to eliminate fatigue. But not take it so easy that you cost yourself fitness in the process. And then I'm a big fan of really responsive anything, but responsive tapers, responsive recovery weeks, responsive training, where you ask yourself, how do I feel? I mean, if I've got a ton of fatigue, I'm going to alter my taper based on how tired I am, as opposed to I'm feeling so good I don't even think I need to taper. I'm just going to roll right into my event, in which case I might do a very short taper on the other end of it. Could be a 2-week taper because I've been training for 6 months and the training load has been so high and so persistent that I need a longer taper in order to get to a place where I feel like I can race at my best.
This brings up a really good point, because I see a lot of athletes say, this is how I taper. And there's a lot of value in learning how your body, there's a lot of value in learning how your body typically responds.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And that's very good. But at the same time, you can't put yourself in a box and just say, this is how it has to be every single time.
Well, and that goes along with the idea that we always assume that a taper is a reduction in volume and no change in intensity. That may not be true. You may that change in intensity may be necessary. You may be so overcooked from those high intensity efforts that reducing the high intensity for a short while, maybe knocking your 120% repeats down to 115 or 110, but an actual intensity reduction may be in line. It's not a foregone conclusion.
Yeah. So learning what your body does and then constantly keeping those principles in place to guide yourself with it. So I guess getting into the demands of like the event, if you want to kind of draw some, I guess you can almost say like guidelines to it.
Well, this goes along with what I'm just saying. I mean, for something like a criterium, you may want to keep your sprint sharp. So you're going to be doing sprint events over the course of your taper week. If you're doing
sprint practice, Nate.
If you're going to be doing a Grand Fondo or, even less competitive, a century, something where you don't plan to go hard at all at any point during the day, why would you possibly taper your sprint or include sprints in your taper?
It just makes you feel good sometimes, though. You feel on. And it's fun to show up to a race.
There's a psychological benefit, and there's no real physiologic toll being taken when you do 6-second sprints, a handful of them in a over the course of a workout.
And it depends, just to Jonathan's point, sometimes in a Grand Fondo, you want to bridge to another group, right?
Sure.
Because you're like, there's a fast group. I got stuck here. There's traffic. It's a 1-minute bridge.
Well, and this again is why it's contextual. How do you plan to ride whatever event this is?
Yeah.
If it's a Grand Fondo, are you going to try to stay with the lead group? Or are you going to let the lead group go and then use riders to get across to that lead group? Are you going to ride aggressively? Or are you going to ride very
just solo?
Leisurely?
Just be like, I'm never going hitting 200 the whole time.
Maybe you're out there to literally get
snacks.
miles.
Yeah.
Hit the aid stations, chat with people, enjoy the climbs, not rail the descents.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I guess the other side of that, or I guess that just goes back to what we're talking about. Like you said, Nate, if you find that doing sprints makes you feel ready, and I'm using air quotes here, like psychologically ready, that's another thing of, like you said, Chad, where the learning process comes in play, where you have to learn how your body behaves with these certain things. You just have to make sure that you're constantly kind of riding that line of that general principle of making sure that your freshness is going up.
I just want to defend Brian's coach a bit, because if he, I mean, Chad's saying the same point,
there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, for other people are listening.
Totally.
If Brian's coach wants to give him as many tools as possible during this Grand Fondo, the reduction in volume with some intensity is probably a great strategy. But what Chad's saying doesn't have to happen. Listen to your body, experiment.
And sometimes the same training carrying into the same event could necessitate a different taper. I mean, so many other things going on, so many other forms of stress could influence it to a point where you need a different type of taper. Because
when I did Ironman, which is the Ironman bike distance leg in Israel, I didn't ride for like a week. I was just like a complete week off.
Coming into it.
Yeah. The time change and the travel, and they had us like doing all these tours, and I was just trashed. And I had a good performance relative to my fitness. But that's like, and other times that might have been disastrous to not ride for a whole week ahead of a race.
Exactly.
So to your point, the stress was high, so the training was non-existent.
Yep. Going to Trace's question. He says, I've been considering purchasing one of your plans for a while, which you purchase the subscription. You get all the plans, Trace, which is a handy thing. He says, and I'm a regular listener to the podcast. Thanks for that. I see that you have programs geared toward gravity racers, but as a top national level masters downhill and enduro racer, I still struggle. Pretty sweet. That means he's really fast. I still struggle to believe that using a stationary bike for training and monitoring only my pedaling power, seated with a stationary upper body, is relevant for the type of racing that I do. I do want to follow a more structured power-based program for next season, so I've been considering using either a rowing machine or an assault bike like an Airdyne. And Chad, can you explain kind of what those are? And Tucker will put in a picture in the forums, then people can see it.
I think Schwinn made them originally, the Airdynes, but they have those big caged fans on the front, and then the two arms that are kind of bullhorn shaped, and they oppose your pedal stroke. So as you're pushing down on one side, they oppose? Yeah, they oppose.
Yep.
So basically you're revving your arms to the same time. It's all linked together. In fact, it's all linked together. It's all linked to that fan. So both your legs and your arms are driving the flywheel.
We had one as a kid, and it made a great clothes hanger. You could put 5, 6 shirts up there.
I think we had one.
Along with a Nordic track. Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, there's the possibility of some upper body conditioning. There absolutely is possibility. And I don't know how you could avoid it, especially if you go full gas like they do in the CrossFit setting.
Yeah, if you want to see them, look up CrossFit videos, and you'll see people doing
They hit it hard. It's usually like a calorie requirement or something. 20 calories on the air die, and then move on to whatever's next.
Which would be like kilojoules.
Yeah.
And you drill it.
Yeah. It's popular in CrossFit right now.
Yeah. Oh, totally. So he says he's been considering using one of those or a rowing machine for my FTP test and subsequent training, since the core and upper body strength required to make power in those machines, the twisting and hinging that you do, more closely matches the muscle requirements of my events. So this is all like a string of logic, right? Like I can see how you would arrive to these conclusions.
I do too, absolutely.
It says recently Jonathan did mention that in his last enduro race, he spent the majority of his time coasting in a few of the stages. Obviously not enough, because Richie Rude, as we found out in that whole video series, did a whole lot more coasting and just destroyed my times. So yeah, maybe I should have spent more time coasting. He says that even though I did that, my heart rate was still very high. My intuition tells me that there is still a fairly large power requirement from bodies in these events, even though we are not pedaling, and I do routinely hit my max heart rate in every enduro stage and downhill race that I compete in. So does following an approach like this make sense, or would the stationary bike still condition the cardiovascular system equally? If this is true, would I just need to focus on strength requirements from my events separately with additional core and upper body work? Cheers and thanks in advance. Podcast is great, and I'm optimistic that the training program will be too. Cool. I think it's probably important for us to point out the fact that we do not have any specific research on this this scenario, right?
No, how Airdyne carries over to
Yep.
enduro riding.
I don't know of any. I searched the web and I came up with nothing. That said, I think that what we can do is look at what the world's best enduro and downhill trainers do in this case. And what they do is they keep them separate. Now, you'll also see that in the off season, for example, Richie Rude or Aaron Gwynn or top athletes like that. I think they work with a guy named Perform MX Training, I believe is the name of the system. Great guy, seems to really know what he's talking about. In the off season, you'll see them doing a whole lot of different things. So you'll see videos of them, I'm sure, on an assault bike, something like that. But when it comes into actually training for the season and when things get more specific, but really their whole entire season once they get out of the off season, they keep it separate. They train on the bike. Richie Rude actually said when he was in here, he loves road riding and he does a lot of road riding, and he does that so then it's just way easier for him to train with a road bike, that sort of a thing. And then they do a lot of stuff in the gym. So it's like separated. And the goal behind that separation is to specialize highly in each one, get the most out of each of those things, and then that basically builds a better product in the end in terms of a fitter athlete. That's the logic behind that. It's not to say that it wouldn't benefit you, though. I mean, if you spent time on an assault bike, you'd still be, building fitness.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. I actually want to make a point.
Sure.
Having to do with that very thing, but I do want to just jump back here for a second. And he said he's concerned about his heart rate being high. So first off, on race day, heart rate has no place. Just dismiss it. It's only going to psych you out. There's no real benefit in watching your heart rate on heart day. Pay attention to how you feel and how you're performing, especially considering you're in a race scenario, which heart rate is going to elevate your sympathetic response. Could be at altitude. You are doing some work. What about the heat? I mean, all these things can have an influence on heart rate. So don't give heart rate too much concern.
Scared out of your mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Downhill race.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Scary stuff.
Fear
Yeah.
goes way
Adrenaline.
up.
Yep.
Well, and you'll see, in those sort of moments too, if you have a really scary moment, your heart rate isn't going to really come down a whole lot. And so there are other things other than just pure performance that are driving that, I guess, is what we're getting at.
Potentially, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, Chad, what do you have to add on this one?
So the conditioning, I understand why he would want to have a greater level of aerobic conditioning in his upper body. It does make sense, but the specificity doesn't work for me because it doesn't carry at all. You have two independently moving arms, whereas with handlebars, everything kind of moves in unison. So right there, that's a different muscular demand. You're not pulling the bars so much as hanging onto the bars and stabilizing your body. So it's not quite the same thing. The only case I can see for introducing aerobic capacity sort of training for the upper body is just to process more lactate in the moment. So if you've got this lactate being shuttled out of the cells into the bloodstream, it can actually get picked up and utilized by other muscles. So you could clear lactate a little faster, which, you know, and the blood acidification that goes along with it, et cetera. But that assumes the muscles that the lactate is effectively, you know, cruising by are exerting the demand. They have to need that lactate to be able to utilize it. So this isn't, I just don't see the muscles working hard enough that they would actually pick up that lactate. They're not going to be, these are more isometric contractions. It's not like this bout of concentric repeats like we see with the lower body.
Trace said too about rowing. What do you think about that?
That's more akin to it. I think if you're going to overlap it with anything, I would scrap the airdyne and stick to the rower, because those joint actions are very similar. I mean, in that case, the legs are moving at the same time, but you're able to address the legs on the bike. The rowing is very much in line with the muscular and metabolic demands of downhilling.
Rip row.
There we are. Yeah,
right.
100%.
That's right.
That's about as specific as it gets.
And that can get you.
You can even have
super
your legs
tiring.
staggered.
Burning.
Yeah.
Another thing that you'll see people use is the ski erg, where they're basically like rowing straight downward. You'll see a lot of people doing
and
that.
that's a lot of muscle mass working, and that's going to be a big demand on the aerobic system. Huge oxygen uptake. I mean, this is why we see in pro-level alpine skiers that they post the highest VO2 maxes. That's because they're using a lot of muscle mass. If these same athletes were sat on a bike and all they were doing was utilizing their legs, we'd probably see VO2 maxes similar to that we see in the top level, you know, cyclists.
If Trace wanted to do this and he's looking at getting an assault bike or a rowing machine, personally, I would get the Rip Row, because that's going to be like a rowing machine but built around exactly how your bike
specific.
is, and you can even get the handlebar width exactly the same.
Honestly, as far as a piece of equipment that's about as specific to the sport's demands as you can get,
that's it.
It'd be the Rip Row.
Yeah. And I think that you look at this keeping things separate, and it makes a lot of sense. And it allows them to really become efficient at different things.
And that's another point I wanted to make is something like this. You can experiment as much as you want to in the earlier phases of training before things get really specific, and you're just trying to improve the level of oxygen you can push through your body, and you want to incorporate the airdyne into your workouts. Why not use it in the base training? It doesn't even have to be considered cross training so much as just another stimulus to incorporate along with what you're doing on the bike already.
Yeah, and where I guess I'll get with like the point of keeping them separate. Let's say you don't keep them separate, and let's say that we don't know this, but let's just assume that you have a potential to raise your FTP to 300, right? If you trained really well on the bike all the way through the year, but because you're instead spending all the time on the airdyne, you only get yourself up to like 250, 260 because of the fact that you're always exerting more demand on your system. Wouldn't it be better to push that needle higher on one side and then to work on the strength demands with specificity that you would have?
Probably.
And I think that's why the top pros do it in the way that they do. It's a better way to get more out of the athlete, basically. Despite it's a very logical way to think about it, though. I can totally see why you would think of it this way.
Yeah, I like the lines along which he's thinking, for sure.
Anything else to add on this one before Doug's question? Cool.
I don't think so.
Let's move in. So this, once again, on the enduro side, but this also applies to all of us that do just long rides and or enduro format racing, but long rides on the road, everything else. He says, what was Jonathan's nutrition strategy for his recent EWS race? I remember listening to a podcast from a previous year, the one where Jonathan told us about his first enduro experience, that he beat everyone going up the hill.
Good for you.
Yeah, won that one. And he says one of his takeaways is that enduro racers don't eat enough. Now, after his EWS North Star race, he had the same takeaway. On both occasions, he didn't go into much, if any, detail on what to eat. I've tried to take on board this advice, but I feel like I'm still getting it wrong. I try to eat foods rather than gels, with the thinking behind that being that transitions are longer and slower efforts. I can process food like that. It's low enough intensity to allow me to digest foods. However, on a recent race practice day, I was sick after the ride and was unable to race on race day. He says, it was unusually hot and sunny day by UK standards. I ate more than usual, and I was riding the transitions at a higher pace than I normally would, so I could keep up with the group. All of this must have contributed to my unwellness after the ride. So that could totally make sense. So how should I be putting together the ideal enduro practice and race nutrition strategy for 2 big days on the hill? There's one really good point that he makes in the asking of his final question there is, and Richie also agreed, the caloric demand on your body is probably higher in your practice day than it is on your race day, because it's a longer day and you're going down a section, hiking back up, going down a section, hiking back up, and doing that for every stage and doing a lot of work with that. So you absolutely have to fuel the day before. And if you drain yourself from that day and then come into the next one, you'll be depleted or relatively depleted and not effective. On one side of things, I think that so you mentioned the fact, and a lot of enduro races are like this, where you go really hard for a short period of time and then you can just ride up at the pace you want. But more often than not, I find that people still find those transitions to be hard. Like, it's a steep climb, so they're riding close to their threshold. And it's not exactly like it's just cruise. You're just not going absolutely all out.
My concern is, even if you were cruising and going at a very light intensity during the race segments, is it enough time for your body to digest whatever it is you're eating? If you're eating whole food, it doesn't digest as quickly as gels and sports drinks will.
Yeah. Just because in the moment it's low intensity doesn't mean that your body still need time.
A few hours for fairly complex carbohydrate. I mean, simple carbohydrate in food form is going to take longer than gel form or liquid form.
Yep. It's kind of different than, because you raced a lot this year. You did like multiple crits in a day.
Yeah.
And you maybe have big windows, small windows?
Small, annoyingly sized windows, 2 hours, which is like just enough where you can't really get full food, but you don't want to eat just gels. But if you're also riding, I mean, you got to do the gels. Don't eat whole foods. I just did this yesterday on accident. My timing for my workout was bad, but I had huge spinach salad and a lentil soup right before I went on the bike. It was like 90 minutes. That is not enough time to digest lentil soup or spinach salad.
So very uncomfortable.
But if I had gels, it would have been plenty fine. I would have been like probably buzzing with all of the energy.
Yeah.
So it's pretty simple, I think, is don't eat whole foods if you're going to be doing these high intensity things, because it's going to be hard.
Yeah. Any level of effort is going to slow digestion.
Yeah.
Yep.
So even if you're working at 60% of your threshold, you have to eat accordingly. I mean, you're not a pro tour rider rolling down the road, I mean, coasting half of the time, who can eat anything they want because they've still got 4 more hours of that ahead of them. This is still pretty active business.
But still, I'd argue, like, it's 2 parts of it. One is what you just said, but 2, if you're going to do something very high intensity and your stomach's going to be full, like in a downhill or enduro race, or a segment on that, a stage, that's where it's hard. And the pro tour riders, right before they go up Alpe d'Huez, they're not like, let's eat some rice cakes and bananas.
Yeah.
Right? They're doing gels.
Just have a big lunch and wait an hour and then do a VO2 max workout. And you'll see exactly what we're talking about.
That'd be very bad. They're taking in those whole foods when it's the long flat stages and they're sitting in the pack and they're spinning along it. They average 250 watts for the day, right?
Or early in the day. I see some people on the start line do bananas right before they start, but it's not going to get super intense.
And these are also riders who have done this time and time and time again. Yeah. So they've figured out what is tolerable and what is not.
And bananas is a lot easier than lentil soup and spinach salad.
The one thing that I can think of is if you're doing like a rare event like Trans-Provence, which I guess doesn't exist anymore. So like you could be doing Trans-Cascadia. Those are like point to point 6 days, and you may ride for hours in between at a low pace until you get to a stage. That's one thing. But the majority of enduro races, you have way less than 2 hours in between stages, right? So in that case, gel and taking in some sort of mix, if you want, in your drink that you're going to be taking in. We've talked about this plenty of times, but people talk about a 90-gram limit, and I'm saying this with air quotes, in terms of carbohydrate and what you can take in and process in an hour. In my experience, I had to work my way up to that and kind of train my gut, but I can take in even more than that and be okay. But you definitely want to be taking in foods that can process quickly, and I think caffeine is a really important thing, especially for enduro, because we're talking about mental acuity and sharpness and when you're out for a whole day. Because like you said also, Chad, like it's a long day. You would normally eat lunch in that period of time. So you really have to take in a lot of calories, and it's a long day. It's easy to get not sharp, and then you're not sharp and you crash. So caffeine gels, usually 30 minutes beforehand is usually what people recommend.
30-60.
If you're stacking up, just make sure you don't have like a 17 stage day and you're just like taking in a caffeine gel on everyone. You might be bouncing off the walls. But yeah, take stuff in that processes quickly and take in a good amount of it. And try to stay away from whole foods when you're racing enduro. Or I guess when you're on those long group rides that are still hard. Daniel, let's go into this question, and this one's on bottle cages, which is actually perfectly appropriate for Kona. He says, I wanted to firstly thank you for a great and highly informative podcast and for the effective training plans and app. I just raced the Atlantic City 70.3, my second half Ironman, and he got 10th in his age group. Way to go. That's impressive. So he says he went under 5 hours for that as well. And he says, thanks to following your plans and spending 90% of the year on the trainer, having very efficient training sessions. Bravo.
50-54 age group too. Hopefully he ages out by the time I get there.
Get out of there. Make room for Chad.
We can adjust his training.
Yeah.
Just make everything 20 watts lower.
He says, I followed the Olympic tri plans through to August for my other A race and then switched to the half Ironman specialty phase for the last month and was surprised at how strong I felt. Averaged over 23 miles an hour for the 56-mile bike split in the rain and with having to circle around to collect one of my bottles. And that's where his question comes in. My question is not so much about the training, but about flying bottles. During the various sprint and Olympic distance races I did this year, he says I just used a water bottle between the arms, but for this 70.3 and last year at half Ironman Lake Placid, I had 2 additional bottles behind the saddle. On bumpy sections in both my races, I lost both of the water bottles behind my saddle before I had consumed any fluids. Oh, that's like worst nightmare, right? Especially if you have like your own mix and you have everything planned out.
That's probably literally triathletes like anxiety dream.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It says this weekend I managed to recover one of them on the next loop. I emptied the contents into my bottle between the arms and placed it back into the cage. It had gone before the end of the race. So he would have had an even faster bike split. Says there were bottles strewn all over the course. I was using profile cages that I used when I purely road raced and had no trouble with them over many years. Pulling the bottles out by hand was a little bit of effort. Took a little bit of effort. So why are the bottles coming out so easily in the races, even when they're almost empty? He says, what can I do about it?
This is so common in triathlon, and you will see there'll be like a lip on a bridge just hundreds of bottles. Hundreds.
Just like shooting out of the air like fireworks.
And I'm not sure. I think it's something where like what's behind your saddle, there's more leverage.
Yeah,
so you get more
leverage.
of a pop than if it's in your triangle. I've never had an issue in the triangle, but please, in the forum, what episode is this, John?
This is episode 230. 230.
Let us know, triathletes, if you have one. But the one that I like is the X-Lab Gorilla cages, and there is an extra tough one. So when you reach behind, it's always going to be harder to get a bottle out, and the Gorilla cages, they grip hard.
Yes.
Like way hard. And I've never had a bottle eject with those. But that's what I use, and that's what I recommend.
At Kona every year, people do like bike equipment checks. So they like wheel count because everybody brings their bike in, or power meter count. I want somebody to do a bottle cage count because I bet like this would be really dominant because you see them on everybody's bike at that level.
Yeah, did you see the Gorilla cages?
All over at everybody. And once again, we're talking about world champs, right? So these athletes have probably been through this before and figured it out. Yeah. I see a bunch of people say like use king cages and grip tape. If you have to put grip tape on your bottle cage, I feel like it's probably not the best bottle cage. There's better options out there. So I know that you can bend those cages and kind of keep them in, but just as you bend them in, they can also bend out. And you take that bottle a little aggressively or put it in at an angle, and you've suddenly bent your cage. That's the nice thing about the Gorilla cages.
So they have Gorilla and Gorilla XT. The Gorilla XT has 14 pounds of grip force, and the Gorilla has 10 pounds.
Wow.
So just know if you get the XT, like you're not going to lose a bottle.
It's going to be hard to get the bottle out behind you.
So I have those, and I can get them out. But, I mean, it's not that hard.
Yeah.
But it's just
you also
not...
got monkey arms.
Yeah. Nate's got some long reach.
Might be a consideration.
Yeah.
It's just hard to... you got to practice it. Or you can sit up and get it.
That's a skill for sure.
It's
I'm assuming you stay in arrow when you reach around and grab that.
I have before, and sometimes I have not.
That's the hard part, is staying in arrow and doing that.
Sure. Yeah, it can get
Once again,
dangerous too.
Nate's wingspan allows such
things. Well, no,
things.
it's far forward too, though.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's all relative.
What bottle cages do you use on the road?
No, the specialized ones.
Rib cage.
Yeah, I've never had an issue.
I've never once lost a bottle with a specialized rib cage ever.
Neither have I.
On the dirt, I use their Z cage.
Yeah,
I've never once lost a bottle with that either.
Yep.
So, yeah, they can work really well. In fact, Seth's Bike Hacks, it's like a YouTube channel if you want to look it up. He actually did a very probably unscientific test, but he put bottle cages on a 2x4 and then dropped the 2x4 from a great height to basically see which ones would let go. And the Z cage just did not let go while a bunch of other ones did. He was testing side loading cages like that. So, interesting point. Okay. Next one is from John. He says, hey guys, love the podcast. It's what brought me to TrainerRoad originally, and my FTP is about 20% up over a year now, which is pretty good.
Excellent.
Way to go. He says, I have a question about cadence during rest between intervals. As it hits peaks of more than 300 watts, I keep my cadence around 90. So that's like the work intervals he's talking about, the hard ones. But when the valleys drop to 90 watts or so, and I'm gasping for breath, my cadence often drops to around 60 or 70 RPM. This is partly because my smart trainer seems to be recording too much power, he says, with high cadence, but even more, it's because I'm gassed. I think what he's talking about there is the fact that you run into a floor with some smart trainers in the sense that 90 watts, that power target, if he just pedals in whatever gear he was in, it may not allow you to drop all the way to 90.
And to fix that is don't be in a big gear, shift into a little gear, or be in a bigger cog in the back, and that'll allow you to not hit that cadence floor issue.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. It says, should I drop my FTP so I can pedal faster during rest? Are there any disadvantages to spinning slowly during rest? Thanks, from John. This is another great question.
Yep. Yeah. So, John, the big take home here is that it's not so much about how slowly or quickly you pedal, so much as you do it easily. I don't think there's going to be any detrimental outcomes because you recover at 30 RPM versus cover at 60 versus recover at 90. Honestly, you're just trying to shed fatigue and get recovered enough so that you can do it again. With that said, let's steer the conversation more towards the intensity of the recovery and maybe even the duration of the recovery, because what you may not realize is that the intricacy and the subtleties of recovery intervals is it's vast. There's quite a lot of consideration that goes into how long they are, how low they are, where they fall, frequency, etc. So the compendium resource on this matter is recently surfaced, and it's caused me to review a lot of the workout designs that I have in place. It's a book titled Science and Application of High Intensity Interval Training. I've talked about it a number of times already. It's Paul Lorson and Martin Buchheit. And what's kind of cool about it is that I go through it and all the studies that they're using on this particular topic, the recovery interval characteristics, are the same studies that I used literally 10 years ago. So it's not like there's been a whole bunch of emerging science on recovery duration intervals or recovery interval durations and intensity. So good news is I don't have to go change any workouts. That isn't to say I wouldn't do it. If we found a better way, we would absolutely put it into effect.
It's one of the things that we adhere to is constant improvement, always making the changes whenever we need to.
Yeah, new information crops up, and we will absolutely make use of it if it makes sense and if it makes you all faster.
And I just want to say too, there's fads that come through all the time.
Yes.
We are completely aware of them. And
yeah, that's true. People do. It seems like they assume we are not aware.
Exactly. Oh, did you hear about XYZ? Yes.
Yes,
we all chat does, but we all hear about it and everyone tells about us. And then we look in the research and we are totally open.
Yeah.
We discuss
We appreciate you sharing, and we're not afraid to have a conversation on the matter, but trust me when I tell you we know.
Yeah. And keep sharing though. Because we
keep it going.
Sure.
Yeah, we like it.
That's what we do all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
And we can't stay on top of all the emerging science. I mean, there are literally thousands of papers a day. It's impossible for us to stay. Although, we are in a pretty narrow niche of all those research papers, so it's a little more
but
possible.
I'm just because people are,
Totally.
Yep.
Oh yeah, I got it.
We try real hard. Yeah, we do.
So yeah.
Okay, so let's talk first off the objectives of recovery. Earlier, let's talk about the objectives of recovery.
For sure.
They're twofold, really. So you're trying to accumulate high overall workload with the workout, and that's going to influence the recovery characteristics, or you're trying to maintain a high level of output in all of your subsequent intervals. So you're trying to start high, stay high, sort of thing. When it comes to accumulating a high overall workload, usually due to low time availability, which we can all relate to, and you basically want to get as much work done in a short period of time as possible. Because of that, this is where you will see either a heightened recovery intensity or more likely a shortened recovery duration. You're just going to cram it all in there and hope for the best. Occasionally, you'll see a combination of the two. And that combination of the two typically weaves its way into the training plan design more towards specialization, when you have to be able to make the most out of a little bit of recovery and you still have to do quite a bit of work during these recovery valleys. So it'll change over the course of a training plan or or a BBS cycle.
Those are the
build
worst.
specialist. Oh, they are, but they're
the best.
prepare you quite well.
Exactly.
The worst and the best.
So like I said, the other end is to maintain a high level of output, interval to interval to interval, to not fall apart over the course of a workout. So you want a big training stimulus. And that kind of comes in two parts, or there are two ways to address that. One is to maximize the work capacity during each work interval. So basically, we're just looking for high watts. And when that happens, that's when we're probably going to lead, or I'm going to lead, will lead me to design workouts with prolonged and passive recoveries. And in passive, I consider 40% FTP pretty passive. I mean, a lot of the studies, when they talk about passive rest, they're talking about runners who walk. They're still doing something. They're not just standing there. Sometimes it's unloaded pedaling. So they're back pedaling, or there's no resistance on the wheel, but they're still moving. Occasionally they'll have them stand there, but I don't see that very often where they just cease all motion. They're still doing some type of activity. So even though it's called passive, it's not 100% passive. And then when it comes, so you'll see these prolonged and passive recoveries more when it comes to the really high intensity stuff, and a lot of the times the really high intensity stuff like the anaerobic repeats and sprint intensity training, and these can get really long, 3 to 1. You'll rest 3 times as long as you work, all the way up to like 10 to 1. You can get crazy long depending on the intensity and the sought after outcomes. One study to support this is Yamagishi and Bob Raj, 2019, Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. They did active rest during the intervals, so they had the athletes continue to pedal, and they derived more of an aerobic stimulus, and this actually led them to more of an aerobic adaptation. So even though they were training the anaerobic component or the sprint component, they got really good aerobic return on it. Yeah. So in this, in particular, they were doing, basically, if you take a look at workouts like Detling, Burling, Chairing, all the ones that are sprint intensity workouts, this is almost exactly what they describe, where they had athletes work 30 seconds at a time, all out, and then they had 4-minute recoveries.
And that's full recovery.
Yeah, so pretty full. I mean, it could be argued that you're not going to regenerate all of your anaerobic work capacity more along the lines of 10 minutes. So it could take quite a bit longer to get full regeneration of it. But I think at like 4 or 5 minutes, you're seeing 95% regeneration. So absolutely enough to work with. Not to mention, it kind of walks that line between anaerobic return and aerobic return. So you get an increased aerobic input with each subsequent sprint, which is why the sprint intensity training workouts are really heavily influenced toward aerobic benefit.
Yeah.
And in this case, because they did the active recoveries versus the passive recoveries, which was the other study group, they actually saw an increase in what they call critical power, but what we call FTP. So they actually got an uptick in FTP by working through these 4-minute breaks instead of just sitting there or pedaling unloaded. And I think they worked at, it was, I can't remember now, but it was a very low effort level, something akin to 40% FTP, which is what I use. And they attribute that to greater cardiorespiratory demands during the active recovery. With the active recovery, individuals gain greater training benefits without increasing total training commitment time. So they didn't have to be on the bike any longer. They just happened to pedal through the breaks, and they derived a greater training stimulus as a result of it. Got faster.
I feel like, oh, sorry, Nate, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
You came in hot to the mic. It's all you.
I'm going to say just a sec. I feel if you train more, you get faster. Like the more you pedal, the more beneficial it is.
Pretty much, to a point.
Like,
as long
rather
as
than
you're
not
not
pedaling.
doing too much work. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Still
That's
has
amazing.
Still has to constitute.
that's what all you just said is like.
Still has to constitute recovery.
Instead of
but yes.
if you're in your workout, instead of not pedaling, pedal lightly.
Yeah, exactly. Don't just sit there. I mean, which nobody does anyway. I wouldn't.
Some people do.
Sure. Occasionally you get so shattered that you have to just kind of sit there and reel.
That's different. But just pedal lightly.
Yeah. Hey, I find, to one point that I find really interesting, I've found that when I'm really getting closer to peak fitness and everything else, that's when my recovery intervals really matter. Not necessarily because I'm getting so fatigued I need them as much, but the distance or the duration of those recovery valleys and then the intensity of those recovery valleys. If I stick to those with adherence, when I follow our plans, then I'm prepped on race day. Yeah. Because I think a lot of the time it's really easy for us to focus on the work and just let the recovery be the recovery.
No, the whole experience gets overtly more race-like. I mean, that is the goal, to make sure that when you get out on the race course, there are no surprises.
And I try really hard to nail my recovery intervals at the same some precision and focus that I do with my work intervals, especially when I'm getting closer to race day, because I've never been in a race yet where I can ask somebody, can you please wait for 10 minutes so my anaerobic stores can regenerate? That doesn't happen, right? So like those rest intervals, if they're constrained, you really need to hold yourself to those constraints when you're getting close to race day.
Yeah, then it's more about performance than conditioning, although there's still a benefit on both sides.
Try it all year long.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You'll just be better, right? Yeah. Let's go into some,
so those were with the anaerobic and the sprint intensity. Then when we get down to VO2 max repeats, we'll still see reasonably long recoveries, shorter than the 3-to-1, 10-to-1 ratio, but still usually a couple minutes. And interestingly, the same study that they cite in this book was the one that I read probably literally back in 2005, was Seiler and Hedelid took moderately trained runners. Yeah, they are runners, but it's still an endurance sport, still repetitive action. Had them do 6x4 at 85% of velocity at VO2 max, which basically puts us right around threshold. So they were doing threshold repeats, but they were doing it on a 5% incline, which makes it definitely above threshold repeats because they were trying to maintain a velocity. So a velocity with an increase in incline is going to probably constitute something more along the lines of a VO2 max effort. Mm-hmm. And they allowed the runners to self-select their recovery window. They wanted them to do these 6x4s, but between each 4-minute interval, they said, recover for as long as you need to before you feel like you can do it again just as well. And what they settled on was about 2 minutes of recovery per. So about a 1-to-2 work to or rest to work ratio, 2-to-1 work to rest.
2-to-1, yeah.
And what was even more interesting was that when they reduced the recovery intervals to 1 minute, they saw a decline in their velocity over the course of each subsequent 4-minute interval. When they lengthened it to 4 minutes, they saw no real change. So 2 minutes was sufficient, which is why if you look at our VO2 max workouts, for the most part, you'll see 2-minute rests. Mm-hmm. But we at TrainerRoad have the luxury of sitting upon a lot of data, seeing a lot of incoming ride files every day, and we notice certain things. And one of those things was that when we used 2-minute recoveries on these VO2 max repeats, we didn't get the sort of workout adherence that we wanted. Therefore, we thought these workouts could actually be more productive. How can we change them? So what did we do but lengthen those durations to 3 and sometimes 4 minutes? And what did we see? Greater workout compliance.
Yeah.
More people getting faster.
So we adjusted our plans earlier in some of the workouts because of this, because you have that study, but we have...
It says what works in the case of, and these are moderately trained runners. So some of our people probably are moderately trained, and maybe those 2-minute windows work perfectly for them. But what about all the people who are recreationally trained or elite trained, but really gas it on the intervals?
The cool thing is that we had workouts with the same intensity, the same duration of, like the same percentage of FTP and the same work period, but ones with 90 seconds, 2 minutes, 2:30, 2:15, and then hundreds of thousands of examples in each one of those.
It's data these studies would dream of having.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
And then we saw a huge drop off. I mean, like a huge increase with just like 30 more seconds. Yeah. The compliance rate went almost like like very low to very high.
Yeah.
Like switch the numbers.
Yes.
For failure versus compliance.
And in the case of those types of workouts, this is the other end of things where we're trying to. So when we maximize work capacity during the intervals, we go about it 2 ways. We either try to jam the watts up as high as we can get them, or we try to keep oxygen consumption as high as we can for the longest amount of time. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of that's more what we're veering toward with these longer ones. So we give them a longer recovery, but the intervals are long enough that we still achieve a lot of time up at that high aerobic or oxygen uptake. Totally. So we're not missing the point by adding 30 seconds or another minute's worth of recovery. We're maintaining high quality in the interval so that we get a stronger training stimulus. Yeah. And then, as always, as you progress through the base build cycle or specialty cycle, by the time you reach that specialty plan, that's when it doesn't matter what works for you or not. This is how your race is going to be like, and this is what you need to be able to do. So this is what the workouts are. Get them done.
Yeah. So that's I'm going to talk about some trade secrets.
Oh.
So that's what rearranging the workouts inside of a plan. Mm-hmm. That's what we did, is because, like how Chad said, maybe that workout in week 3 has a very high compliance rate, whereas week 1 it didn't.
Yeah.
So by making those small tweaks, we get a higher compliance, and at the end you're actually do more work, and you're more likely to do more power or do more repeats later in the plan than if you did.
Yeah.
Like you made the workouts different earlier on.
You're faster.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's the goal.
These are all things we have access to teasing out. It's pretty fantastic.
It's pretty neat.
It's neat.
Okay, so
it's neat.
What else do I have
It's
here?
pretty neat.
I'm just about done on this. Okay, so there was another. Oh yeah, so the other end of this. So like I said, we try to keep the watts high, or we try to keep the oxygen uptake high. in order to keep the oxygen uptake high, which is a very strong training stimulus, we basically try to maintain a high level of oxygen uptake during the recoveries. This is why the recoveries are short, and this is sometimes why they're tall.
Yes. Unfortunately, so some might say.
Yep. So it's very active recovery. So
that's a good way of putting it.
Over unders.
That's
Very active recovery.
That's the nature of active recovery. That does not qualify. No. So DuPont 2004 used 15-15s, and they just call it high intensity intermittent exercise. So I honestly don't know. I think it was. I don't know. I did look into it. I'm sorry, I can't recall right now. But the point of it was they used passive recovery in between the 15-15s. So 15 seconds of going full on, 15 seconds of doing nothing, versus active recovery, where I think they had them work at 40% of VO2 max. So we're talking about 50%-ish of FTP. The people who practice the passive recovery versus, the passive recovery time to exhaustion went up a ton, whereas active did not. I think I may have switched that around.
We'll add it in on the forum. We'll add in the proper order to those ones.
Yeah. Let's table that one for now because I
messed up my notes with a confused look.
That can't be right.
Cool.
Anyway, so to wrap all this up, at the time of development, I'm very clear on what I'm trying to achieve with the workouts. Even if as I get past, creating a plan or creating workouts, I lose sight of what I was originally intended on. So the due diligence has been done, I promise you. And if we learn better things as we evolve, we're happy to change them. We're happy to learn from our own research.
100%.
We're not tying our boat to a specific training methodology.
No.
We don't care.
Science.
Yeah, exactly.
We're tied to science.
Exactly. It makes you faster and keeps you healthy. We're all about it.
Yeah. Phil, we're going to go into some live questions that people have submitted. So Phil first says, hey guys, remember the guy you interviewed last year? And it was actually a couple years ago, the Irish guy, Emmett, with a broken collarbone. Yes, we do. We're good friends with Emmett, and I talk with Emmett every week, actually. So
he brought us Lucky Charms.
He really did. He was an Irishman, brought us actual, not like the cereal, but he brought us actual Lucky Charms from Ireland. That's amazing, right?
Literal Lucky Charms.
Yep, literal Lucky Charms. I have ones on my son's backpack right now. So, but he said that he got back to Kona. Yes, he did, of course, and ran a 3-hour marathon. I know. 3:04 is what he ran. So he qualified for Boston at Kona, basically.
Isn't that insane?
Pretty amazing. So yeah, and it was great. We got to see Emmett. A number of folks that we've had on the podcast previous years there. I got to even ride on Maui with Mike Stanek, the guy that did the backflip over Mario Lopez.
Oh yeah.
I got to ride with him on Maui, which was fun.
Oh really?
He went there afterwards, so we did a couple rides together. Yeah. So that was really cool. Okay. Somebody said that we described Ironman Louisville, by the way, in terms of what we wanted.
I kind of want to go international just because it's a great excuse to go see some other part of the world. And because we do events in the U.S., but we haven't done, have we done any of? No. Together, we have not gone to like Europe, Australia.
All three of us? No.
Asia, together.
Never have.
Which would be nice too, so.
The other side of it too is another constraint for this is I don't think I'm in danger of qualifying. I think Chad is the one that would be closest.
I'm
to
the most
qualifying.
likely, but it's far from a safe bet.
I'm not qualifying.
If
I'm going to try, but I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, exactly. It's not that we're not going to try.
We're going to go as fast as we can.
Sure, yeah. But I think along those lines, like let's say Chad qualified, and I think Louisville, but I don't even know if Louisville's coming back next year. I heard it might not. I don't know. But if Louisville happens, I think it happens the same day as Kona. Let's just say you qualified. Then, Chad, you get to look forward to another full year of full distance training. How do you feel about that?
Maybe he enjoys it. No, he doesn't do a whole year. He can maintain.
I certainly wouldn't do a whole year. I'm still not committed to the idea of doing Kona should I qualify.
No, you said it. John was there.
I know. I've since thought about it too, though.
You were drinking.
Actually, I just watched people race, and I thought this looks like a miserable endeavor.
All you have to do is look at that run, and then every time when you look at the run, you're like,
real.
Ooh, whoa.
I mean, qualifying for Kona is the big get. Once you go, you just have to get it done. There's nothing to be accomplished by getting through Kona except getting through Kona. And if
you could do a road bike,
I'm not sure that's motivating enough for me. Yeah. Just to complete Kona.
I think it is. It's cool. Like you'll get caught up in it.
Yeah, well, let's cross that bridge if and when.
I don't. I think you can do it, Chad.
I think you can too.
I appreciate your faith in me, Nate.
Yeah, I think it'd be pretty exciting.
I know. I just want to talk more about Chad. He's a great time trialist. He's comfortable in his position. Like that, you will be one of the top in your age group.
That's a big deal. Like, and that just came together like over the last year and a half.
Yep.
And we found some cross piece that you're going to get for your Giant Trinity that's going to make the whole extensions and everything else really stable.
Yeah. So like the one weak link in that bike's chain is strengthened.
If you could hold like 250 watts, you would be one of the top people in that 50 to 54 age group, which I think you could do, right?
At Kona? Is that what we're talking about?
At any
just
qualifier.
To qualify?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
You're going to have a pool in your backyard, and your fiance is an ex-collegiate swimmer?
She swam in college.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you got the skill, you got the thing, and you got a coach. And then you also
swam on the team in college. It's not like she got in the pool while she was in college.
Yeah, she swam in college. Yeah,
She jumped in.
I realized when I said that, it sounded like I was.
and then you went to? Did you
she
go
was
to
in college once? She
as a
swam.
duathlete? You went to age group nationals. Is that right?
Duathlon didn't have such stringent requirements. Nationals was open to all comers.
All right, so
I qualified for Worlds. But
You qualified. Okay,
Worlds, yeah.
so you qualified
There
for
we go.
Worlds.
On a roll down.
What's your?
parentheses.
That's okay. What's your 10K? Like best 10K or
I've done a
5K?
sub 40. It was like 39.08 or something.
Yeah. So, and if you can even get that a little bit better, you got it.
That was just prior to injury, so I was on a track to get it better, but I rushed the process.
You can do it. You just got to lose some of those muscles. You're big. You've got more upper body mass than probably a triathlete needs.
Yeah, I won't argue that.
Yeah.
It's not going to do me any favors, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's got to carry it everywhere. Anyways, it's enough about Chad.
Peter says, I'd love to ask for and he says, office lunchtime plan. He says in quotes, due to life, I have basically 60 to 75 minutes, 5 days a week. And he says, how should I construct my plan? A lot of people, by the way, this is the cool part about joining us on YouTube every week. A lot of people have already been answering his question with great suggestions. But you can look at the workouts, and they usually have a 60-minute variant. So if you were to follow one of the training plans, you can drop down the volume on those.
Or 45.
Or 45-minute. We also do have like a plan of like really short workouts, the time crunched plan that you could follow. And you'll still see it's fantastic quality training that you can get from that. But I see a lot of people, if you don't have time, that's the nice thing of having the lower variant in terms of volume. You can cut down a little bit on the time, which is nice. And it's also worth saying that it's not like Chad just like lops off the beginning or end. Some of these you'll see they have slightly different structures to them because you're trying to put the right amount into each bucket that was intended with the original workout. So it's strategically done.
It's still what I consider to be a well-developed workout. It's just trimmed down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Another person says that for your mountain bike with its wonderfully lengthy name, they say that it's like $1,000 per per word in the title. That sounds about right. Okay, rolling through. A lot of people are talking about waking up early and getting their workouts done. This is cool stuff. You can jump in and get like a bunch of like insight from a lot of different people. And question here. Somebody says, has anyone in this forum here ever raced through the build phase?
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Mm-hmm. I think that
I've raced through Sweet Spot Base, the latter half of Sweet Spot Base.
And I had great races in Sweet Spot Base. Yeah, same here. Yeah, fantastic races.
Fantastic races.
In fact, I would argue, let's just say like, if your event's like a single Grand Fondo or something like that, or you don't have a goal event, that's one thing. But otherwise, I would argue that incorporating races that are close to the demands of your goal event is a responsible thing to do, and you should be doing it through the build phase. It's just going to help prep you better.
I just have to mention our jobs. Next time I'll mention it at the top.
Yes.
But we do have a new job posting up for a copywriter. So that's going to be a remote job with we can have you as a U.S. employee and some overlap with the West Coast office, but it doesn't have to be complete overlap. We also have dev jobs still open for C# like backend web engineers and React or React Native engineers. So apply those at trainerroad.com/jobs.
/jobs. That's where you can go and check them all out. We'd love to have you. If you're awesome, we want you. Another person, let's see, somebody says, how would I incorporate cleans into my gym workouts? We've talked a lot about incorporating strength training into your endurance training. And you can find, if you go to blog.trainerroad.com, you can see where we have like strength training recommendations, and cleans isn't one of the exercises that we really recommend. It's not that it's bad, but it's just not one that
it's a really good strength movement. It's highly technical, but it's good stuff.
Chad, would you find them to be detrimental or something that you wouldn't want to include or anything like that?
No, honestly, if you're going to do cleans, you're probably going to do them heavy. I don't know why you would do them for high volume, which means you could probably do them just about any time without having a negative impact on your endurance training. As long as it's, I mean, I do this very thing with squats or even deadlifts, where just in the middle of the day, I'll go do a set of 5 and that's it. Another couple hours later, a set of 5, and it weaves into the endurance training, no problems at all.
Got a question about when Chad updates workouts, did the plan get automatically updated, or they're part of your calendar?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. One time,
go ahead. I'll just, go ahead. You want to say it?
No, explain that thing first, and then I'll talk about something else.
So if you update if we update the individual workouts, they will be automatically updated. If we update the plan and you already have it in your calendar, it won't be automatically updated.
The order of the workouts.
Yeah, exactly. But we will post about those in the forum, and then we'll mention it too on the podcast. And then you can then reapply the plan if you want.
Yep. And then related to that, I made the mistake of changing workouts rather than creating variations of the workouts. That didn't go over so well, and I understand why people want historical reference to the workout the way it was. So I no longer change a workout. Rather, I create a version of a workout, and if that gets slotted into the training plan, then Nate just described what happens there.
Cool.
Okay, with that covers it. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. You can join us on YouTube. It's usually every Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific. That's an easy way to do it. Next week, you can join us as well at that time. The week after that, we won't have a podcast. It'll be a week off. But once again, we still have a week in between now and then. So please submit the questions. You can do so at trainerroad.com/podcast. And we can go through those questions. And I do that every week. I read those questions, and then we build up a list to go over. And head over to trainerroad.com to get faster. That's entirely our focus. We talked a lot about that this week, about how we do it, and it's our obsession. So if you trust us, we love it. See y'all next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.